Sherlock Holmes at Hogwarts. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination. So don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like. And if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 51 Snape, My Rules Are My Rules. Enough. Stop with your ridiculous tricks for fooling people in the Muggle world. Upon hearing Sherlock's deduction, Snape's piercing gaze immediately shifted from Harry to Sherlock. Holmes, who do you think you are? Guessing what happened here after just a few glances. Do you really think you're some famous detective from a novel? It's deduction, not guess. Snape's cold aura had no effect on Sherlock. He even corrected Snape. Actually, I can offer some information that might help with this case. Shut up. I don't have time for your boring analysis, Holmes. What I'm telling you is, Snape sneered, because of this, Gryffindor will lose 20 points. Despite the head of Gryffindor being right beside him, Snape made this decision without hesitation. Upon hearing this, the expressions of the three people beside Sherlock immediately turned grim. Especially Hermione. After all, this whole thing started because of her. As for Professor McGonagall, she remained indifferent to Snape's point deduction, as if she had already tacitly approved of Snape's actions. But the next moment, she suddenly uttered something that surprised everyone. Mr. Holmes, may I speak? Professor McGonagall, Snape abruptly turned to her. Are you sure you want to listen to a first-year student spouting nonsense? I think it would be better to put him in solitary confinement for a while. Thank you, Professor Snape, I know exactly what I'm doing. Professor McGonagall calmly looked at Snape. Mr. Holmes is a student of my house, and I am willing and obligated to hear his opinion. After saying this, she turned to Sherlock. Mr. Holmes, you may begin. This is a premeditated case. Under the watchful eyes of 3 professors and 3 students, Sherlock didn't mince words and went straight to the point. The one who left this blood-written message is a man, less than 6 feet tall, middle-aged, and right-handed. He is agile and cunning, but currently troubled. This was not his intention, but rather instigated by someone else. Furthermore, he used a wand that was approximately 9 inches long. Enough. Sherlock spoke faster and faster, and the expressions on the faces of those listening to his eloquent speech grew increasingly astonished. Finally, a sudden voice interrupted his statement. That's enough. Snape looked coldly at Sherlock, speaking with undisguised contempt and disgust. How, the great detective Sherlock Holmes? I already said, put away your boring tricks. Perhaps you can rely on them in the Muggle world, but in the wizarding world, Snape's eyes suddenly deepened. I advise you to be careful. After saying this, he paused, then, as if suddenly remembering something, added, Gryffindor loses 10 points as punishment for your rambling in front of a professor. Upon hearing Snape's words, Harry, Hermione, and Ron were immediately horrified. If the previous point deduction was punishment for their wandering around, this was clearly an expression of rage. It was clearly Sherlock who was rambling, wasn't it? This was obviously a rule he made up on the spot. However, since the other party was a professor, the 3 dared not express their resentment, even if they were indignant. Otherwise, they would surely face even harsher point deductions. After all, Snape was always so unreasonable. So, the 3 of them unanimously turned their gazes to Professor McGonagall. Faced with such an obviously hastily made-up reason for deducting points, wouldn't Professor McGonagall, known for her justice and fairness, speak up for them? Especially since she was the head of Gryffindor. To their utter surprise, McGonagall looked at Sherlock and said, word by word, I am very disappointed in you. The moment these words were spoken, Harry, the 3 of them felt their hearts sink to the bottom. How could this be? It seemed Professor McGonagall was extremely dissatisfied with Sherlock's performance this time. That's right. After all, although Sherlock pretended to be very confident, the details sounded too unbelievable. Even they, who had witnessed Sherlock's abilities many times, still found it hard to believe. Let alone McGonagall, who didn't know Sherlock at all. But, no matter what, deducting points just for this was too much, wasn't it? Surprisingly, Professor Quirrell, who looked utterly weak, suddenly stammered, Professor, there's no rule like that for deducting points. The 3 of them immediately brightened, their eyes filled with gratitude as they looked at Quirrell. At that moment, even the pungent smell of garlic on him seemed less offensive. But the next moment, Snape retorted without hesitation, "My rules are my rules, Quirrell, Greek letter sigma, Cyrillic letter dec." That wasn't all. After saying that, Snape coldly stared at Quirrell and continued, "And what you should be doing now is getting back home as soon as possible, Quirrell." Oh, seeing even a professor succumb to Snape's tyranny, how could Harry and the others dare to act recklessly? Only Sherlock remained unmoved, instead displaying a thoughtful expression. McGonagall, seemingly oblivious to the scene, said to Sherlock and the others, "If you're not injured, you'd better hurry back to Gryffindor Tower. The students are all enjoying Halloween dinner in their houses." Outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. On the way back to Gryffindor Tower, Ron was practically insane. Snape is going too far. What kind of excuse is that? I bet you he made it up on the spot. Harry and Hermione nodded repeatedly. After the troll incident, the rift between Harry, Ron, and Hermione had disappeared. Now, facing Snape, their common enemy, the three formed a united front, condemning him in unison. Even Hermione, who always respected professors, was no exception. But to their surprise, Sherlock then said, "Actually, Professor Snape is a good person." Huh? The three turned in unison, looking at Sherlock with shocked expressions. He said earnestly, "To be precise, Professor Snape is a despicable but kind good man." Sherlock, how did you put those two words together? Hermione stared wide-eyed at Sherlock, completely bewildered. These two words aren't opposites, so why can't they be put together? Faced with Sherlock's question, Hermione was stunned. Indeed, kind and despicable aren't antonyms. But, putting them together just felt strange, both in pronunciation and sound. Ron, unwilling to give up, asked Sherlock why he hadn't taken him and Harry with him when he went to find Hermione. Sherlock then told him it was because he was worried they would delay the rescue. Ron looked miserable. "You're really honest." "I said I don't lie in most cases unless necessary. I really appreciate your honesty." And so, the group chatted as they walked, finally arriving at the portrait of the fat lady. Chapter 52 The Great Detective Sherlock Holmes. It was Halloween Eve. News of the troll's demise spread, and the Gryffindor common room was packed with young wizards. The little lions, already enjoying a meal, were even more excited and unwilling to go to sleep. This environment meant that Sherlock and the others' absence went unnoticed. When they returned, they easily blended in. However, the atmosphere among the four of them was undeniably awkward. The external conflict with Snape was manageable, but now that they were back in the common room, it was best not to discuss that topic again. The main awkwardness lay with Hermione and Ron. Sherlock had never known what awkwardness felt like. As for Harry, he hadn't done anything wrong in the whole affair. Finally, Hermione broke the silence. She first looked at Sherlock and said thank you, then she smiled and nodded to Harry and Ron. Then she practically fled to her plate. "Granger, wait." Ron stretched out his right arm, fingers spread, trying to call out to Hermione. He genuinely wanted to apologize. Unfortunately, she was already gone. "It's all right, I don't think she'll mind." Harry patted Ron on the shoulder and said this after seeing this. Ron looked at Hermione, who had already blended in with the girls, and could only sigh and lower his hand. You can't teach a person by just talking to them. You can learn something from experience. After that night, Hermione Granger became less concerned about breaking school rules. This made her much more endearing, and her relationships with her classmates were no longer as strained as before. She even became friends with Harry and Ron, after Sherlock, who could call each other by their first names. 3 days after Halloween, and the day before the first Quidditch match of the season, Harry was suddenly called out by Professor McGonagall while he was training. Harry initially thought McGonagall was going to give him a pre-match pep talk. After all, if they could win the match against Slytherin, their ranking in the House Cup Championship would rise to second place. However, as he walked, he sensed something was wrong. Professor McGonagall, without saying a word, led him to a small, secluded tower. Then, they went straight up to the 8th floor and stopped in front of a gargoyle-shaped stone beast. As soon as she gave the command, the gripping stone beast nimbly leaped aside, and the wall behind it split in two. A spiral staircase, hidden behind it, slowly ascended into view. Harry neither knew nor dared to ask, and silently followed Professor McGonagall to the top of the stairs. A gleaming oak door appeared before them, topped with a brass knocker in the shape of a griffin. Harry had been somewhat dazed along the way, completely unaware of what Professor McGonagall intended to do. But as she pulled the knocker open, Harry froze. Before him lay a spacious and beautiful circular room, at one end of which was a huge table with uniquely claw-shaped legs. On a shelf behind the table sat a tattered, wrinkled wizard's hat. Harry immediately recognized it as the sorting hat that had brought him to Gryffindor at the opening ceremony. Of course, the most striking thing here was the long-bearded old man in the room. The moment he saw him, everything else was subconsciously ignored by Harry. Albus Dumbledore. This was the headmaster's office. In that instant, several thoughts raced through Harry's mind. Quidditch was important, for both him and Gryffindor. But, even if it was important, it shouldn't warrant Dumbledore's personal encouragement, right? Or had he broken the rules again? Harry tried to recall his recent behavior. He hadn't broken any rules, except for disobeying orders and going to the underground classrooms on Halloween Eve. But wasn't that over? While Harry was still in a daze, Mr. Holmes, may we begin now? As Dumbledore spoke, Harry realized something. He had been too nervous to notice anyone else besides Dumbledore. Looking around, he saw that besides Dumbledore, McGonagall, who had just arrived, and himself, Sherlock, Hermione, and Snape. Combining this with Dumbledore's words, Harry suddenly understood. Could it be that he had come here at Sherlock's behest? My dear Harry, just as you thought. When Harry instinctively looked at Sherlock, the latter, as always, saw right through him. To verify the reliability of my statement, I need your help. Before Harry could respond, Snape's cold voice rang out, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the great detective, has brought them all as you requested. I hope you won't disappoint us. So, it was Sherlock's doing that he came here. Hermione must have too, but why? Before Harry could figure this out, Sherlock turned to Hermione. We can begin. Hermione nodded and began recounting the events of the last charms class before Halloween. At this moment, Harry finally learned from Hermione's perspective what had happened that day. It was exactly as Sherlock had deduced. First, unable to bear Ron's mockery, she hid in the girls' restroom and cried for a long time. Second, Sherlock rescued her before the troll arrived. Third, she and Sherlock discovered their whereabouts. Finally, the four of them followed the troll and discovered the terrifying, inexplicable blood-red lettering. Although some of the content was based on Harry's own experiences, it sounded fresh coming from Hermione's mouth. Just as Harry was listening with great interest, Sherlock suddenly spoke up. Your turn, Harry. Huh? Harry was taken aback, then realized Sherlock wanted him to recount what happened that day, just like Hermione. Meeting Dumbledore's encouraging gaze, Harry composed himself and slowly recounted his experiences that day. During his recounting, he vaguely understood why Sherlock had asked him and Hermione to come. On Halloween, Sherlock, himself, and Hermione each had an experience that didn't intersect. They had acted independently. As for why Ron wasn't called along, it was naturally because he and Ron had been together the whole time. But why wasn't Quirrell there? With this question in mind, Sherlock finished recounting his experiences and began his own. However, his opening remarks startled everyone. First, Professor Quirrell let the troll in the underground classroom and Harry and Hermione's mouths dropped open in surprise. But Harry, who unconditionally trusted Sherlock, quickly recovered. I see. That's why Quirrell isn't here. McGonagall and Snape raised an eyebrow. Dumbledore, however, turned to Harry and Hermione, his tone gentle, but his words left them speechless. Harry, Hermione, may you please leave? Harry and Hermione instinctively looked at Sherlock. Only after seeing Sherlock nod did they reluctantly walk out the door. Headmaster Dumbledore, it seems that in Mr. Potter and Miss Granger's hearts, our great detective Sherlock Holmes is more trustworthy than you. Hearing Snape's sarcastic remarks, especially the emphasis on Headmaster and great detective Sherlock Holmes, Dumbledore laughed. Severus, this old man nearing his end is no match for the young. Snape, Sherlock, you can continue. Chapter 53 Revenge. In the headmaster's office, Sherlock calmly analyzed a case. Second, that line of blood was left by Professor Quirrell. Third, everything Professor Quirrell did was under someone's orders. Silence, a long silence. And the evidence. Dumbledore spoke, his eyes full of curiosity. Just what happened that night, when all the improbables are eliminated, whatever remains, however unbelievable, is the truth. Sherlock spoke quickly in his usual calm tone. Even if he's looked down upon, Quirrell is still a professor of defense against the dark arts. Being terrified by a troll like that is already excessive, but to run all the way from the underground classroom to the Great Hall, tell you everything he had to say, and then faint, that's really clumsy performance. Dumbledore smiled and said, Minerva once told me that you have amazing analytical and reasoning abilities, and now it seems that's true. That night, you made some deductions about who left the blood message. Can you tell me how you knew these? After that night, McGonagall specifically sought out Dumbledore and told him Sherlock's deductions. The blood-written words were left by a middle-aged man less than 6 feet tall, right-handed, wielding a wand about 9 inches long. He was agile and cunning. This wasn't his intention, but rather instigated by someone else. Even before the start of the semester, McGonagall had mentioned Sherlock's deduction that Hogwarts was in the Scottish Highlands. Now, with this latest development, Dumbledore was naturally very interested. Actually, deducing these things is quite simple. A person's height can be judged from the length of their stride. The calculation method is simple, but explaining it step by step now wouldn't be helpful, so I'll skip it for now. When someone writes in a relatively small space, they'll habitually choose the center position. Judging from the traces left at the scene, using the center of the room as a reference point, the line of writing was slightly to the right. Combining these 2 points, one can deduce the person's height and dominant hand. Since they were using a wand to write, the length of the wand can also be determined incidentally. It's as simple as child's play. And how did you determine their agility and cunning? Professor McGonagall couldn't help but ask. Compared to Dumbledore and Snape, she had witnessed Sherlock's abilities firsthand. His ability to deduce Hogwarts' location in the Scottish Highlands based solely on clues, despite knowing nothing of magic, was truly impressive. That's why she supported Sherlock's deduction that night. I arrived at the underground classroom the moment I saw Professor Quirrell, and even then, I only just managed to meet Hermione before the troll, which shows he's quite fast. Professor Quirrell released the troll for 2 reasons. First, to create chaos so he could approach the 4th floor corridor. Although I don't know exactly what Mr. Dumbledore had Hagrid place on the 4th floor, that was clearly Professor Quirrell's target. Unfortunately, he failed. Dumbledore and McGonagall exchanged a glance. You deduced this too? Yes, Sherlock said, then looked at McGonagall. In a way, we should all thank Professor Snape. Dumbledore smiled. McGonagall looked slightly surprised. Snape remained expressionless. While the others were frantically searching for the troll in the chaos, it was Professor Snape who rushed to the 4th floor and stopped Professor Quirrell, getting bitten on the leg in the process. Also, that night, Professor Snape clearly stopped me from continuing my statement to protect me. Professor Snape must have thought that Professor Quirrell, upon hearing my analysis, would believe that I had deduced that he was the one who did it. Holmes, Snape finally couldn't hold back any longer, saying angrily, "Don't talk about irrelevant things." Sherlock had originally wanted to elaborate on Snape's bite, but seeing the other's furious expression, he could only shrug and give up helplessly. Professor Quirrell's first objective was thwarted, so he had to settle for second best and join the other professors in dealing with the troll. Of course, he didn't need to fight the troll. Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape were strong enough to handle it. As for the blood-written words, he had already prepared them when he released the troll. This is evidenced by both the timing of the spell and the traces left at the scene, so I won't elaborate. After the professors return from dealing with the troll, Professor Quirrell will lead everyone there to the Mark of Blood. Incidentally, Professor Quirrell's performance after seeing the blood mark was too convincing, which confirmed my suspicions about him. So, what does RASH stand for? Is it the person who instructed Quirrell? A very bold guess. Sherlock shook his head. My friend Hermione also thought that the blood mark was originally meant to be written as a woman's name, Rachel, but was interrupted by other matters and didn't finish. However, I don't think it's necessary to waste time looking for any Miss Rachel, because Rash means revenge in German. I deduce that the person who instructed Professor Quirrell has serious racist tendencies, which is why they used German to write the word revenge. So, Sherlock paused, looking at Dumbledore. Sir, can you tell me what you've found now? The moment those words were spoken, even Snape, who had been about to launch into a sarcastic remark, froze. He and McGonagall both turned their gazes to Dumbledore. Meeting their stares, Dumbledore paused, then smiled. Minerva's judgment is as excellent as ever, Mr. Sherlock. You are even better than she described, Albus. McGonagall looked at Dumbledore nervously. It's all right, Dumbledore waved his hand, meeting Sherlock's gaze. "I have indeed discovered something." Hearing this, Sherlock immediately clasped his hands together, resting his chin on them, his eyes fixed intently on him. From the moment he learned that Dumbledore had summoned him, Sherlock already knew what would happen tonight. Finding Quirrell was just the beginning. The truly important thing was the person behind him. However, he lacked complete information, so he needed someone like Dumbledore to further confirm it. However, Dumbledore suddenly turned to Snape. "Severus, could you please leave for a moment?" "Snape, in that case, I won't disturb your gathering any longer," Snape said through gritted teeth. "But, Dumbledore, you owe me an explanation." With that, he turned and walked out of the headmaster's office without looking back. "Youth is wonderful," Dumbledore sighed, watching Snape's retreating figure, then looked at McGonagall. "Albus, me too." McGonagall pointed to herself, looking incredulous. "I'm sorry, Minerva," Dumbledore said. Still smiling at Professor McGonagall, "Please believe me, McGonagall." Greek letter sigma, Cyrillic letter dare. Chapter 54. He's still a child. As soon as Snape stepped out of the headmaster's office, escorted by Dumbledore, he saw Harry and Hermione whispering amongst themselves, and his expression immediately changed. "Why are you still here?" Harry was startled and quickly tried to explain. "Professor, we just..." However, before he could finish, Snape rudely interrupted him. "Potter, I'm not your babysitter." He completely ignored Hermione beside him, his gaze like a sharp blade piercing Harry. "Why don't you use your brain before you do things? Or, is that thing around your neck just for show?" Snape's vicious words left Harry speechless, momentarily at a loss for words. "Besides your brain, are your ears also useless? What are you doing here? Do I need to put you in solitary confinement?" Harry and Hermione's expressions changed drastically. Just then, Professor McGonagall, her face even more somber than Snape's, pushed open the door and entered. "Professor Snape, Potter was brought here by me, and he's a Gryffindor student. Even if someone needs to be dealt with, it should be me." Snape was visibly taken aback when McGonagall emerged from the headmaster's office, but a knowing glint appeared in his eyes. Harry and Hermione both noticed a slight upturn to Snape's lips, whether it was a misperception or not. "All right, Professor McGonagall, but I don't think you should continue to indulge him like this." "Severus, I am the headmaster." This time, it was Snape who was interrupted. He glanced at McGonagall in surprise, seemingly not expecting her to say such a thing. McGonagall ignored him and led Harry and Hermione away. Harry and Hermione, who had originally intended to stay and wait for Sherlock, fell silent and obediently followed. At this moment, they even felt that Professor McGonagall was more terrifying than Professor Snape. Once the three had disappeared from his sight, Snape turned back and glanced at the headmaster's office again, a complex look in his eyes, before drifting away. Headmaster's office. Sherlock clearly sensed that Professor McGonagall seemed even angrier than Professor Snape at being asked to leave Dumbledore's office. He looked at Dumbledore. "Do we really have to wait until it's just the two of us to say this?" "Yes, but not now," Dumbledore said, tapping the table with his wand, his gaze falling on the portraits hanging on the wall. "Gentlemen, could you please excuse us for a moment?" The portraits, some male and some female, had all been softly snoring in their frames when Sherlock arrived. Now, with Dumbledore's words, the portraits on the wall began to grumble in dissatisfaction. Some, who had been dozing off, finally stopped pretending under Dumbledore's gaze and grumbled as they moved away from their frames. "They're all former headmasters of Hogwarts," Dumbledore began, a hint of nostalgia in his eyes, as all the frames were now empty. Sherlock instinctively asked, "You too, what?" Dumbledore didn't immediately grasp Sherlock's train of thought. "I mean, you'll be hanging here someday too." "Yes, but I hope that day doesn't come too soon." Sherlock understood immediately. After a brief silence, Dumbledore spoke first, dropping a bombshell. "I suspect Quirrell has begun working for Voldemort." Sherlock wasn't surprised. "So Voldemort really isn't dead?" "I've always suspected he isn't dead," Dumbledore said seriously. "Although many believe he left 11 years ago, for a powerful dark wizard like him, resisting death would be a difficult thing." He then looked at Sherlock with some curiosity. "You don't seem surprised." Rupert Hagrid said something similar to Harry, Sherlock stated bluntly. "Some things that happened after I came to the school have further confirmed my suspicions. But if that's the case, why not just expel Quirrell from the castle?" Judging from the historical records, Voldemort's strength is undeniable. Even in his weakened state, He's still not to be underestimated. But since they know Quirrell is problematic, why not nip the danger in the bud? Quirrell, he's an excellent Ravenclaw, and as headmaster, I can't abandon my students, even after they've graduated. Dumbledore's voice was low. He's changed a lot since the start of the school year, but I can also sense that he's been struggling. Don't you think so too? Is that your reason for letting others go? Dumbledore's reason made Sherlock laugh. Quirrell is your student, but aren't the others? Harry, me, the first years, and all the upperclassmen in the castle, they are all your students. Just to save one misguided person, perhaps an irredeemable one, you're willing to gamble with so many lives? For someone who writes revenge in blood, I don't think he deserves it. Sherlock's words were almost accusatory. Dumbledore, after all, wasn't Snape. He said gently, Sherlock, I must admit, you are even better than Minerva said. Thank you, you've already said that. Even when faced with praise from the greatest white wizard of the century, Sherlock didn't feel proud. You're not a fool, so, what gave you the courage to keep Quirrell at school? Sorry, I have a guess, but there are some things I can't tell you right now. It's because of Harry. What did you say? Sherlock's words stunned Dumbledore once again. You've placed your hopes on Harry, haven't you? Sherlock said expressionlessly. Dumbledore looked at Sherlock without speaking. The man's unusual sharpness suddenly reminded him of someone, an old acquaintance. Before he could even begin to reminisce, Sherlock launched into a rapid-fire tirade. Albus Percival Wulflick Brian Dumbledore. Headmaster. People say that Voldemort's only fears you. But you yourself just said that Voldemort is a dark wizard who can defy death. So I don't understand why you think Harry can fight the instigator of the wizarding wars? He's just a child. A first-year student who has only just begun learning magic. Or do you really believe that Harry Potter is the savior, and that he defeated Voldemort? If so, perhaps you could go to the jungles of Uganda and play sumo wrestling with the mountain gorillas. Maybe the violent slaps will clear your head. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55 Dumbledore, Gale, there are geniuses here who can surpass you. Sherlock was always a bit sharp-tongued. However, since entering Hogwarts, everyone he encountered had been very polite. Even Snape, who was constantly targeting Griffin, was seen by Sherlock as a kind-hearted but despicable person, so this side of him had never really surfaced. This time, when Dumbledore tried to use his friends, he finally snapped. Actually, Sherlock wasn't against using people. He often used Harry and Hermione himself. If Harry and Hermione were willing to use him, he wouldn't refuse either. But Dumbledore's behavior was clearly different. Knowing Quirrell might be Voldemort's henchman, he still let him enter Hogwarts, putting Harry on the brink of death. His purpose in saying this was clear. If Dumbledore couldn't give him a clear explanation today, he wouldn't let Dumbledore continue to act with impunity. Faced with a furious Sherlock, Dumbledore was stunned once again. He lowered his head, lost in deep thought. After a long silence, he finally spoke slowly. To say that Voldemort feared me most is to flatter me greatly. He possesses power I could never have. As for my guess, if anyone could truly kill Voldemort, that person would only be Harry. Dumbledore's words were like a lightning bolt, dispelling all the doubts in Sherlock's mind. 2 months at the school, Sherlock had gradually lost his fascination with magic. In an instant, all the clues connected. Only Harry could? What sets him apart from others is, the only one who survived Voldemort's killing curse. His parents protected him as an infant, so your confidence stems from that scar? Or, a curse that still provides protection? This series of thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant, and as Sherlock blurted it out, Dumbledore's expression became even more complex. That feeling of déjà vu intensified. Dumbledore's thoughts returned to that summer in Godric's Hollow. At this moment, he even felt that Sherlock was more perceptive than that old friend. So my deduction was correct. Sherlock knew from Dumbledore's expression that his prediction had been confirmed once again. Yes, my child, you are absolutely right. Dumbledore looked at Sherlock and slowly said, I think you should know about the prophecy concerning the savior of the wizarding world. Hearing Dumbledore mention the prophecy of the savior, Sherlock blurted out without hesitation, the one who can end the Dark Lord's rule will be born into a wizarding family at the end of July. This was something Hermione had found in the library. Although the source was a rumor, The results seem to be true. The content is correct, but it's not accurate, Dumbledore sighed. To be precise, the prophecy states that a boy who has defied a Dark Lord's family 3 times will be born at the end of the 7th month. The Dark Lord himself will mark him as a formidable enemy, and he will appear and defeat Voldemort. Sherlock immediately extracted the key information from Dumbledore's words. Personally marked him as a rival, indeed, Dumbledore smiled. You did notice that Neville Longbottom's birthday is only 1 day before Harry's, Sherlock said bluntly. So, who the savior was actually decided by Voldemort himself. Yes, there were 2 children who met the criteria for the prophecy, but Voldemort ultimately chose Harry, Dumbledore said with a complicated expression. On that very day, Harry's mother used an ancient spell to protect him. A spell imbued with the greatest emotion in the world, love. Voldemort's killing curse on Harry was deflected and vanished. As for Harry, he became the only lucky one to survive the killing curse. This protective spell still protects Harry to this day. Is that your confidence? Despite understanding the whole story, Sherlock was still not satisfied. I think you should know that the older something is, the more powerful it is. Don't worry, this curse will eventually break, but it's too early to tell now. It probably needs the power of blood ties to maintain it, right? Before Dumbledore could explain, Sherlock said, that's why you insisted on having Harry stay with the Dursleys. After all, they're Harry's only family in this world. Dumbledore stared blankly at Sherlock. He was speechless. Sherlock's performance today had completely exceeded his expectations. Looking at Sherlock before him, at this moment, the white-haired man suddenly had this thought pop into his mind. See? Gale, there's a genius here who can surpass you. Thinking of Harry's miraculous survival under Voldemort's killing curse, and McGonagall's previous visit to ask for Harry's special admission to the Hogwarts, his thoughts diverged further. And, there are 2 at the same time. Gale, even with Sherlock's superb reasoning ability, without enough information, he couldn't guess what Dumbledore was thinking. Seeing that the other person seemed somewhat dazed, Sherlock frowned. Besides this reason, is it also because you couldn't completely kill Voldemort that you made Harry face him? Sherlock's words immediately pulled Dumbledore back from that distant summer. He gave Sherlock a deep look, his expression turning serious. I now suspect that even if Voldemort is killed, he will be resurrected in some other way, perhaps even stronger, so not abandoning a graduate is only one reason, Sherlock pondered. The key is that you need Harry to face Voldemort personally to determine if the spell is effective and to what extent it can be used against Voldemort. Sherlock, as you said, others are also my students, aren't they? Dumbledore finally smiled again. Don't worry, Harry will be fine. I'm not the only one protecting him, like Professor Snape. Oh, I'm glad we share this view. No, I feel Professor Snape is more pragmatic than you in this regard. If only Harry could think like you. I think we can change the subject. Want some cockroach candy? No, thank you. Alright, I'm glad Harry has a friend like you. Whether or not to tell Harry about Quirrell is up to you, but I hope you won't tell him about our agreement. Very well, so what exactly did you put on the 4th floor? The Philosopher's Stone. That's the ingredient for the elixir of immortality. I think you understand why Quirrell is interested in it. So, really, how about a cockroach candy? Next topic. Okay, Petunia. Harry's aunt. She initially wanted to become a wizard like Harry's mother and even wrote to me. Obviously, you rejected her. Sherlock, you should know that these things depend on talent. You don't like cockroach candy? How about a glass of honey water? Let's change the subject. Chapter 56. You're a really nice person. You spent so long in the headmaster's office, and all you did was discuss the inheritance Harry's parents left him. Sherlock met with Harry and Hermione again the next day. When they heard Sherlock recount his discussion with Dumbledore, they were both stunned. Oh, and Ron too. He expressed strong dissatisfaction with Sherlock's actions the previous day. If Sherlock had faced Dumbledore, McGonagall, Snape, and the other big shots alone, it wouldn't have been so bad. But you clearly invited Harry and Hermione, so why did you leave him out? What did that mean? Was it intentional? Sherlock was indeed intentionally. In his view, Ron's role in the whole incident was simply to get Hermione to go to the girls' restroom alone. After that, he accompanied Harry the entire time. So there was no need for him to repeat what Harry had said from a different perspective. In fact, without this incident, Sherlock's investigation of the troll incident would have been much easier. It was like unnecessarily increasing the difficulty. In that case, it was better not to invite this partner. Of course, everything has 2 sides. This incident taught Hermione a lesson, making her realize her own problems. Now she gets along much better with her classmates than before. This is also somewhat of Ron's credit. Ignoring Ron's complaints, Sherlock turned to Harry. Harry, you might not believe it, but your parents left you a lot of inheritance. Yes, I've already seen it at Gringotts. Harry's mood inevitably sombered at the mention of his parents. Sherlock, seemingly oblivious, continued, no, that's only part of it. In fact, your parents left you many other things, all in the Potter family's old house. Harry looked up in surprise. The latter looked at him and said, word by word, besides that, the Potter family also possesses a very effective hair regrowth potion. Because it's so effective, even the publicity staff are using. There isn't a single bald person in the wizarding world as a core selling point, advertising it widely. According to the agreement, you'll receive a patent fee for every unit sold. However, these families haven't paid for 10 years. Although Dumbledore said he'd help, I personally suggest that you handle debt collection yourself. As he said this, Sherlock's eyes sparkled with excitement. Seeing Sherlock earnestly offering advice, Harry was momentarily speechless. You could say he was doing it for your own good, but bringing up this topic at this time was somewhat inappropriate. You could say he was stirring up trouble, but knowing Sherlock as he did, he knew the other man genuinely meant well. That's precisely why he was even more speechless. Speaking of which, I don't think I've ever actually seen a bald wizard. It's all thanks to the Potter family. Ron couldn't help but interject. Sherlock nodded. Just as Ron said, he had long noticed that all wizards, regardless of age or gender, had a full head of hair. He had originally thought this was a perk that wizards had compared to muggles. But after hearing Dumbledore's explanation, he realized that the Potter family had made such an outstanding contribution to the wizarding world. Sherlock was immediately filled with respect. After all, baldness is a man's greatest enemy. But what if someone uses Harry's hair growth serum and it doesn't work? What then? Ron couldn't help but ask again. Normally it's unlikely, but if it really happens, it'll be troublesome. Sherlock stared at Harry, his face serious. The other party will definitely think the Potter family's hair growth tonic is all hype, and might come looking for Harry to settle scores. If he's narrow-minded, it's not impossible for him to retaliate against Harry for something like this. Harry, let's not talk about this. Sherlock and Ron were drifting further and further off topic when Hermione quickly interrupted them. She looked at Sherlock and asked, Professor Dumbledore kicked us all out just to tell you this. Is the headmaster that free? No, not at all. I offered it myself, Harry. Sherlock then looked at Harry. Dear Harry, this is what you deserve. Don't feel bad. Harry's expression was complicated. Thank you, Ron, you're such a nice guy. Who asked you that? Hermione finally couldn't hold back anymore. She lowered her voice and shouted, What's the situation with Quirrell? So that's what you want to know. What else? Hermione looked helpless. Who would care about hair growth serum? Insufficient evidence. We can't confirm that Quirrell is Voldemort's henchman. Hearing this name, Ron couldn't help but shudder. Insufficient evidence? Hermione was a little excited. Sherlock, didn't you already make a deduction? You said it yourself. It was just a deduction, Sherlock said calmly, although I'm almost certain that the trolls and the Scarlet Letter were Quirrell's doing. Without solid evidence, Dumbledore wouldn't have taken action against a professor. How could this be? Hermione's mood was somewhat downcast. That's Voldemort. How can they just ignore such a dangerous figure who's after Harry? Because she had found the prophecy about Harry and Voldemort in the library, Hermione knew exactly why Voldemort was targeting Harry. Because of this, she understood Harry's situation better than Ron. Surely the hair growth tonic couldn't have been ineffective? Dumbledore promised he would protect Harry. Sherlock wasn't lying. He just didn't finish his sentence. Sherlock knew very well that without him, encouraged, or rather, instigated by Dumbledore, even if Harry didn't know the truth, he would be swept away by passion and charge forward. Perhaps with the protection of Dumbledore, McGonagall, Snape, and others, Harry could truly escape danger. But Sherlock felt this wasn't right. He felt that a person shouldn't be manipulated like a puppet under the guise of it's all for your own good. Struggle requires strategy. That's why he strongly demanded that Dumbledore tell the truth. Even so, Sherlock still sensed that he was hiding something from him. But it didn't matter, he wouldn't be able to hide it for long. Is there a possibility? Ron muttered softly, that Snape is actually the bad guy? I always felt Professor Quirrell wasn't the type to do something like this. Hermione glanced at Ron, unusually not refuting him. Indeed, compared to Professor Quirrell, Snape seemed more like the bad guy. "You have a huge misunderstanding about Professor Snape," Sherlock said, looking at Harry and offering a serious suggestion. "Although he's annoying, he's the one who least wants anything to happen to you. On the contrary, if you feel you're in danger, you can always ask him for help." Okay, Harry now trusted Sherlock unconditionally. Seeing Harry's expression, Ron didn't say anything more. He realized that even if Sherlock said the sun was square, Harry would believe him. Seeing this, he simply asked another question that concerned him. "Since the blood letter was written in German, why don't you think the mastermind is German? Thank you Demonic for the 100 Kidian coins. Your support is my motivation to update." Chapter 57 Professor Snape's Secret. The answer is actually quite simple. You were there. If you had paid a little attention, you would have noticed that the letter A is somewhat modeled after German, while real Germans often use Latin script. Conversely, the final E is written in cursive, a style typical of British handwriting. Perhaps it was superfluous, perhaps it was an attempt to cover it up, or perhaps it was just his skill level. In any case, his imitation wasn't very sophisticated. Therefore, I can say with absolute certainty that this letter was definitely not written by a German. Ron couldn't help but exclaim, "I knew it." "You're amazing." Harry noticed that Sherlock seemed pleased by Ron's praise. In fact, he had already noticed this. Whenever someone praised Sherlock's achievements in detective work, his friend would react with the same sensitivity as any girl hearing someone compliment her beauty, provided the praise was genuine. As expected, after Sherlock finished his analysis of the Scarlet Letter, he surprisingly said to Ron, "I can tell you something else." "What is it?" "You must find it strange. Why have I always insisted that Professor Snape was a despicable but kind-hearted person?" This time, not only Ron, but even Harry and Hermione were immediately intrigued. "Yes, why?" "Yeah, why is that?" "Because Professor Snape and Harry's father were rivals in love. Greek letter sigma, degree Cyrillic letter de degree." The topic was so explosive that the three young wizards gaped, unable to close their mouths for a long time. "Harry, Professor Snape's love for your mother was sincere and pure." Sherlock looked at the shocked Harry and said calmly, "After your mother passed away, that love transferred to you." Greek letter sigma, degree. Silence. A long silence. After a while, Hermione was the first to recover from her shock. She took a deep breath and asked curiously, Did Headmaster Dumbledore say this too?" Even if it was Dumbledore, it was still too far-fetched. "It's obvious." Sherlock shook his head. "You don't even need to observe it." Hearing Sherlock say this, Hermione suddenly thought of the situation in the first potions class. "You mean, the flower language of the Victorian era?" Although she was interrupted by Snape halfway through her sentence, Hermione remembered Snape and Sherlock's conversation very clearly. Daffodils are a type of lily, also known as lily, which happens to be Harry's mother's name, and its flower language is "My regret follows you to your grave." Artemisia represents absence and bitter sorrow. Sleeping pills are a living dead potion, representing a hellish and miserable life. Snape's question at the time was, what would you get if you added daffodil root powder to Artemisia infusion? Sherlock had already given the answer. Daffodil root powder added to Artemisia infusion could be made into sleeping pills, which were precisely a living dead potion. So, translating Snape's question and answer according to Sherlock's interpretation, it meant, the lily falls into bitter sorrow. "I deeply regret your mother's death and have lived a hellish life ever since." Once she understood this, Hermione's eyes widened even more. "My dear Hermione, I'm glad you still remember this," Sherlock said with a smile. "That's why I said there was no need for special observation." Professor Snape had expressed his strongest feelings for Lily's son in the first potions class. Combined with his usual behavior in potions class, this was enough for Sherlock to make the deduction. For the next whole day, Harry, Hermione, and her friends were immersed in the shock of this news. This topic was simply too explosive. That evening, Sherlock called Harry out and handed him a box. "What's this?" Harry hadn't recovered from the shock and was already curious about why Sherlock had called him out alone. Now, seeing this box, he couldn't help but speculate. Did this box contain Professor Snape's secret? "This is a gift from your father." Well, his mind was filled with Snape right now. He was definitely overthinking things. But upon hearing it was his father's keepsake, Harry's expression instantly changed. As if holding a priceless treasure, he opened the box, his gaze momentarily fixed. A strange object, somewhere between solid and liquid, sat quietly in the center of the box, its silvery gray color shimmering. Harry cautiously reached out his hand, then was surprised to find that the shimmering object was actually fabric, and its texture was extremely strange, as if woven with water. "This is an invisibility cloak. Dumbledore asked me to tell you to use it with caution," Sherlock said with a smile. Although he didn't say it aloud, I could tell he was hesitant. "I think he's worried you might use it for something bad." Harry seemed not to hear Sherlock's words, continuing to gently stroke the invisibility cloak his father had left him. After a long while, he finally looked up at Sherlock. Why what? Sherlock noticed Harry's reddened eyes and couldn't help but feel a little strange. What was wrong with Harry? "Why give it to me?" "I mean," Harry said softly, suppressing his excitement, "Professor Dumbledore certainly wouldn't have given it to me if it weren't for you." Hearing Harry say this, Sherlock couldn't help but smile. "My dear friend, I'm glad you trust me so much. But I must say, Dumbledore originally intended to give it to you, as a Christmas present. It came up when we were discussing the inheritance your parents left you, and I suggested he give it to you now, and thankfully he took my advice. However, I think you'd better use it after the Quidditch match," which is exactly what I was planning to do then, Sherlock. Before Sherlock could finish, Harry suddenly stretched out his arms and gave him a hug. "Harry," Sherlock looked at Harry's sudden enthusiasm with a puzzled expression, not understanding what he was doing. Harry released him and said sincerely, "Sherlock, you're amazing. I don't know how to express it, but thank you. For me, the luckiest thing about coming to school is meeting you." Sherlock smiled. "It's an honor to receive such high praise from a savior." Hearing Sherlock say this, Harry looked very embarrassed. "I'm not a savior. You're much better than me. I was just lucky." "Luck is always part of strength," Sherlock said seriously. "From now on, many things you need to do will require luck." "I'll listen to you." Sherlock smiled again. Those 4 simple words represented complete trust. "By the way, what did you say you were going to do after the Quidditch match?" Harry asked curiously. Sherlock smiled for the 3rd time. "To make you stronger, thank you to the roadside dummy for the 100 Kidian coins, to the lonely village resident for the 100 reading coins, and to reader 202307012-32607911 for the character Sherlock Holmes for 500 Kidian coins. Your support is my motivation to update. Chapter 58. What I'm about to tell you, don't be afraid." Since November arrived in Scotland, the weather had grown increasingly cold. This was especially true for Hogwarts, located in the Highlands. The mountains surrounding the castle were covered in snow, which hadn't melted for over 10 days. The Black Lake had frozen over long ago, and many young wizards were playing on the ice. Although the first Saturday was sunny, the temperature remained low. That morning, everyone in the great dining room was excitedly discussing the first Quidditch match of the season, Gryffindor vs. Slytherin. Frequent glances were cast at Harry. This was because news had spread that first-year student Harry Potter had been exceptionally admitted to the Gryffindor house team as the Seeker. Gryffindor Captain Wood was furious. His original plan was to use Harry as a secret weapon, catching them off guard on match day. He had gone to great lengths to keep it a secret. He never expected the news to leak out, just as Sherlock had predicted. But now, investigating who had leaked the information was pointless. Wood could only rage helplessly. Almost everyone was fascinated by Harry's Quidditch debut. Some said he'd play brilliantly. The savior of the wizarding world couldn't be bad at Quidditch, otherwise he wouldn't have been promoted to the house team as a full-fledged player. Surely he didn't get in through connections? But others said he'd performed terribly. Especially this morning. Rumors were circulating among the students that someone would need to run alongside him, holding a mattress to prevent him from falling. Probably Malfoy and his friends. "They've been jealous of you being able to play a full-fledged match as a first year," Hermione guessed. "Obviously," Sherlock said calmly, "it's pointless except for venting, though the imagination is commendable." "Harry, you should eat some breakfast," Ron mumbled, stuffing sausage into his mouth. Harry shook his head. "I don't want anything. How about some toast?" Hermione coaxed. "I'm not hungry." Harry shook his head again. He felt terrible. With only an hour left before heading to the pitch, he was so nervous he'd already gone to the bathroom several times. However, this did little to alleviate his terrible, tense mood. "Eat something," Sherlock said to Harry. "You need to conserve your energy. The Seeker is the opponent's primary target." Harry hesitated, then nodded, taking the toast Neville offered. "Hermione and Ron, equals, so you only listen to him, huh?" At 11 o'clock, Almost the entire school had gathered in the stands around the Quidditch pitch. Although the seats had been raised halfway up, the game was still sometimes difficult to see, so many students brought binoculars. Sherlock led Hermione and Ron to the highest row. They had to thank Wood for getting this prime spot. Even now, Wood hadn't given up on getting Sherlock into the house team. He'd even given him special treatment. Sherlock could watch the practice. In the process, Sherlock had become familiar with the house team members, making getting a VIP seat a piece of cake. Neville, Dean, and Seamus, the demolition expert, immediately joined in upon seeing the situation. As Sherlock's roommates, Neville and Dean even brought over a sheet that Ron's pet rat, Scabbers, had soiled. Together, the three used it to create a giant banner that read, "Potter will win." Dean, a skilled artist, even drew a large Gryffindor lion at the bottom. It was quite a feat. Seeing the huge banner, Hermione thought for a moment and then cast a spell on it. The paint began to shimmer with iridescent colors, becoming even more conspicuous. "Where's Holmes?" Seamus asked, admiring Hermione's magical skills while looking around. Everyone knew Sherlock was Harry's best friend. He should be there in this situation. "He needed to talk to Harry and just left," Ron said, a chicken leg dangling from his mouth, without looking up. "Oh, what could be so important?" Dean was somewhat surprised. The competition was about to begin. At that moment, Harry, along with the other team members, had changed into their bright red Quidditch uniforms in the locker room. Sherlock pulled Harry aside and said, "Harry, don't be afraid of what I'm about to tell you." Harry, oh, how could I not be afraid when you say that?" He secretly swallowed, then heard Sherlock ask, "How's your broomstick?" "You mean Nimbus 2000, although he didn't understand why Sherlock suddenly asked this, Harry still answered honestly, "Very good. I only need to touch it lightly, and it turns in the direction I need." "Good. If my deduction is correct, it might have some problems in the upcoming match." "What problems?" Harry immediately tensed up. "Don't worry, my friend, it's nothing serious." Sherlock patted Harry on the shoulder. "Someone will cast a spell on your broomstick and throw you off during the match." "Harry, Greek letter sigma, degree. Do you want to hear what I'm talking about? Someone wants my life, and you say it's not a big deal." "I just checked. Professor Snape is there. He'll protect you." "Harry, Greek letter phi, T Cyrillic letter T, Greek letter phi. Why do I feel even more scared? Also, I'll stop them immediately." Hearing Sherlock say this, Harry felt a little relieved. He lowered his voice. "Is it Quirrell?" "It's not certain yet, but if he makes a move this time, it's almost certain. Actually, I originally suggested Dumbledore come to watch the match. With him there, you'd be absolutely safe. But that way, the person who wants to make a move will know they can't do anything and won't act." Sherlock paused suddenly, hesitated for a moment, and then asked a question. "This is dangerous?" "Even so, are you still willing to continue the match?" Harry looked up sharply. He noticed that although Sherlock's expression seemed as cold as usual, a hint of worry flashed in his eyes. More importantly, he sensed concern in the seemingly casual tone of the other man. Harry immediately understood that Sherlock was worried. Worried about having taken on the responsibility of luring the enemy out. He used to talk about Professor Snape, but it turns out he himself has this dishonest side. Thinking of this, Harry suddenly wanted to joke with Sherlock. "What if I say no, then I'll compete in your place?" Sherlock immediately said. "Harry, oh, thank you, Sherlock." Harry's eyes were a little moist. He looked at Sherlock and said softly, "Since you and Dumbledore both need me, let me do it." "Hey, Potter, Holmes, aren't you ready yet?" Captain is about to start speaking. He won't be able to concentrate without an audience. "Ouch, why did you hit me?" The Weasley twins had just started to speak when Wood slapped them away. Chapter 59, Focus on key points, don't lose points. Hearing the Weasley twins half-joking urging, Harry turned around and called out, "Just a moment, almost done." Sherlock sensed something in Harry's voice and smiled, saying, "My dear friend, I can sense you're tense. Relax a bit." Noticing Harry still wasn't relaxed, he patted him on the shoulder. "Believe in yourself, you have a natural talent for this. Remember to stay focused on the field and don't lose points. Also, once you're out of trouble, finish the match as quickly as possible." After saying this, Sherlock said goodbye to the others and left the dressing room. He'd said what he needed to say, the rest was up to Harry. When Harry rejoined the Gryffindor team, Fred Weasley asked curiously, "What did he say to you?" It was only because of Sherlock. Anyone else certainly wouldn't be allowed into the dressing room before the match. Therefore, everyone was very curious about Sherlock's special visit to Harry. "Sherlock came specifically to encourage me," Harry said, puffing out his chest. "He reminded me to stay focused during the game and not lose points." Harry knew he couldn't tell anyone about Quirrell. "Well done," Wood loudly affirmed Sherlock's statement. "Holmes is right, we all need to stay focused and avoid losing points." After saying that, he didn't forget to remind Harry, "Potter, you need to step up your game and get your friends into the house team soon." Harry hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'll try." At this moment, Wood cleared his throat and turned to the crowd. The lads, and the girls. Chaser Angelina Johnson chimed in, making her presence known and indicating that there were more than just lads present. "Yes, and the girls too," Wood agreed. "It's time, Fred Weasley, this is the moment, George Weasley, the moment we've all been waiting for. We know Oliver's speech by heart," Fred said to Harry. "We were in the team last year." "Shut up, you two," Wood snapped, making a threatening gesture, but the two, having already learned their lesson, nimbly dodged aside. The twins' banter eased the tension considerably. But as Harry followed the crowd out of the dressing room and towards the roaring pitch, he suddenly felt his knees go weak again. Even as Ms. Hooch, acting as referee, announced a match to the teams, he still felt this way. Until, a banner fluttering high came into view. Above the crowd, the words "Potter will win" shone brightly. Seeing it, Harry immediately knew his friends were there. In an instant, he felt a surge of courage. His back no longer ached, his legs were no longer weak, and he walked with renewed vigor. "Hey, it's that amazing." As Madame Hooch blew her silver whistle, Harry mounted his Nimbus 2000. "Keep it up, don't lose points." Using Sherlock's words to encourage himself, Harry and the others soared into the sky. The match officially began. Sherlock had already returned to the stands. "What did you say to Harry?" The match had just begun, and the golden snitch, the key to victory, hadn't appeared yet, so both seekers were temporarily idle. Hermione seized the opportunity to ask Sherlock. "I reminded him to be aware of potential accidents during the match," Sherlock said, taking out his binoculars and peering into the crowd. "What did you say?" Sherlock spoke casually, but Hermione and Ron were startled and immediately crowded around. "Is Harry in danger? A close call." "Huh, found him." Sherlock lowered his binoculars and looked at his two friends. Clearly, hearing that someone was planning something bad for Harry, both looked worried. Ron even lost his appetite for his chicken leg. "Are you willing to help?" "Of course, absolutely. Look over there." Hermione took the binoculars and looked in the direction Sherlock was pointing. "Professor Snape, a little to the right." "To the right, you mean Professor Quirrell?" "Yes, what you need to do is simple." Sherlock looked at Hermione and said quickly, "Stay nearby and observe. Once I give the signal, find a way to disrupt Quirrell's spellcasting. Be careful not to let him realize your intentions." Hermione and Ron gasped. "Sherlock, you mean, Quirrell will harm Harry in the match?" "If I'm not mistaken, this match is a rare opportunity for him." "Oh my god." Ron's face turned pale, and Hermione covered her mouth in surprise. She looked at Quirrell, then at Harry, and finally nodded emphatically. "I'm going right now." After Hermione left, Ron quickly pointed to himself and asked, "What about me?" "What about me?" "You keep an eye on Professor Snape." Ron paused, momentarily confused. "Didn't you say Snape was a good guy, a wicked but kind good guy?" Sherlock corrected Ron, then continued, "I need to verify a guess." "I don't need to go over there, just keep an eye on him from here." "No problem." Ron nodded emphatically in agreement. He liked things like this, Sherlock doing the thinking, and he doing the actions. A little while later, Hagrid arrived at the arena. He was so large that even after Hermione left, Ron and Neville had to squeeze together to make room for him. "I was in the hut the whole time, but how should I put it? Watching a match is just a different atmosphere than being in a crowd. Hey, where's that muggle girl? I sent her to run some errands." Hearing Sherlock's explanation, Hagrid didn't ask any more questions and focused his attention on the match. The situation had changed. Cryfinder Chaser Angelina Johnson got the quaffle at the start, and after being dispossessed and then dispossessed again, she scored first, taking the lead. A cheer erupted from the stands. Slytherin immediately showed their strength, quickly responding, and the score was tied at 10-10. Just then, a passionate voice suddenly rang out, "Wait a minute, is that the snitch?" The commentator for this match was Lee Jordan, a friend of the Weasley twins. He was also the one Sherlock had been observing while waiting for Harry at platform 9 3/4. Sherlock's initial assessment of him was an experienced, expressive, outgoing, and articulate person who frequently hosts events. Lee Jordan's commentary was fast-paced and rhythmic, almost like rapping. At his prompting, everyone noticed the golden light. A small, round ball flapped its wings and darted through the air. It was the golden snitch. Thanks to the roadside dazed beast for the 100 Kidian coins reward, your support is my motivation to update. Chapter 60: A lack of sportsmanship. The rules of Quidditch are that the first team to catch the golden snitch gains 150 points. At the same time, the match ends immediately. This means that as long as the score difference doesn't exceed 150 points, the team that catches the snitch wins. So, the moment the golden snitch appeared, Harry and the Slytherin Seeker naturally rushed towards it without hesitation. Their starting times were almost identical, and they initially moved side by side. However, as the youngest Seeker in a century, Harry was no ordinary player. Despite starting at the same time, his unique flying posture and equipment advantage quickly created a full body length gap between them. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that, barring any unforeseen circumstances, Harry would inevitably catch the golden snitch. Snape, who witnessed this, seemed to realize something, a clear look of disgust flashing in his eyes. Not far to his right, Quirrell, staring at Harry, suddenly narrowed his eyes. Hermione, who had been hiding nearby, saw this and quickly gripped her wand. Was it finally time to make a move? Just as Harry was about to catch the snitch, a sudden change occurred. With a deafening crash, Slytherin Captain Marcus Flint flew in from the side, slamming into Harry. The impact sent Harry's Nimbus 2000 veer wildly off course. Fortunately, thanks to Sherlock's prior warning, Harry was mentally prepared. Caught off guard, he immediately gripped his broom tightly. A loud chorus of boos erupted from the stands. Madam Hooch blew her whistle to stop the game. She stormed over to Flint, vehemently condemning his actions. She then awarded Gryffindor a free kick at the goalposts. Flint did it on purpose, Ron roared angrily. Dean yelled, malicious foul. Send him off. Referee. Give him a red card. You can't send someone off in Quidditch, Ron said, a hint of regret in his voice. And what's a red card? Hagrid, however, agreed with Thomas. They should change the rules. Flint almost knocked Harry down in midair. He'll pay for it, Sherlock said calmly, looking at the towering Flint. Ron, Hagrid, Dean, and the others suddenly felt the temperature drop several degrees. With Angelina Johnson's successful free kick, the score became 20-10, Gryffindor regained the lead, and the interrupted match resumed. But the golden snitch had vanished from everyone's sight, a somewhat disappointing turn of events. Harry, on the other hand, breathed a sigh of relief. Because of Sherlock's warning, he had been on edge the entire time. He had even suspected Quirrell of being responsible for Flint's brutal charge. But now it seemed to be the latter's individual act. This was simply a player utterly devoid of sportsmanship and morally bankrupt. This even made Harry begin to suspect that the opponent might have Korean ancestry. After intensely condemning his opponent in his heart, Harry, now adrift in the sky, felt somewhat aimless, and a thought involuntarily popped into his head. Could Sherlock have made a mistake? Even if Quirrell really wanted to harm me, he wouldn't be so crazy as to do this in front of the entire school. However, this thought had barely formed when his broomstick suddenly shuddered terrifyingly. Shit, Harry cursed. He quickly abandoned any hope of escape and immediately used all four limbs, gripping the broomstick tightly with both hands and clamping it firmly between his knees. Just a second later, he knew how wise he had been. The Nimbus 2000, which had previously been as easy to control as he was now completely out of his control, rapidly weaving through the air. Not only that, but it was also violently swaying from side to side. Clearly, the broomstick intended to throw its master, Harry, off the plane during its spiral ascent. Sherlock, naturally, was the first to notice Harry's strange behavior. He quickly turned his binoculars towards Quirrell. Sure enough, Quirrell was staring intently at Harry in the camera's view. Strangely, he didn't speak as expected. Sherlock immediately realized it was a silence charm. He then turned the camera to Snape. This one wasn't staring at Harry like Quirrell, probably unaware of the situation. Mainly, Slytherin had just scored with a quake, leveling the score again, attracting the attention of most people, including Snape. However, Snape was Snape. He quickly noticed the problem and began to react immediately. At this moment, only a handful of people noticed that Nimbus 2000 was convulsing and twisting wildly, carrying Harry higher and higher away from the field. Ron, alerted by Sherlock's instructions, immediately panicked. "Sherlock, I really don't know what Harry's up to," Hagrid muttered, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. "If I didn't know him so well, I'd think he couldn't control his broom." "You're right," Sherlock said coldly, handing Ron his binoculars. "Keep an eye on him," he naturally referred to Snape. Ron grabbed the binoculars and saw Snape standing in the middle of the opposite stands, his eyes fixed on Harry, muttering incantations. "What's he doing?" "Trying to sabotage." "Quite the opposite, he's protecting Harry." With that, Sherlock raised his wand. A purple firework burst from the tip. Having gotten the answer he wanted, it was time to act. Even the most oblivious among them realized something was wrong. Lee Jordan exclaimed rapidly, "What's wrong with Potter? His flying broom seems to be malfunctioning." "Good heavens, he can't control himself." Mrs. Hooch was also bewildered, hesitating whether to stop the match. Just then, Marcus Flint once again displayed his lack of sportsmanship, seizing the opportunity to catch the quaffle and throw it 3 times in a row. However, the Gryffindor players were all focused on Harry, and no one paid him any attention. A group of them surrounded Harry, trying to get him to safety. But before they could get close, the flying broomstick rose again, leaving them far behind. On the other side of the stands, Hermione, who was lurking near Quirrell, saw Harry's situation and was anxious. Like Sherlock, she guessed that Quirrell was casting a silent spell. But remembering Sherlock's earlier instructions, she patiently refrained from interfering. Her anxious gaze constantly shifted between Harry, Quirrell, and the location of Sherlock below the banner. Several times she almost intervened, but ultimately chose to trust Sherlock. She interlaced her fingers on her knees, silently praying for Harry's safety. Finally, a purple firework rose from the direction of the banner. Hermione immediately realized it was Sherlock's signal to her. Without a word, she drew her wand and whispered the spell she had prepared beforehand. Soon, a bright blue flame leaped from the wand, heading straight for the hem of Quirrell's robe. "Thanks to King Alexander Caesar for the 100 Kidian coins. Your support is my motivation to update." Chapter 61 Snape. There's a rumor in the wizarding world that ever since Professor Dumbledore refused to let van der Leyen, the Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts at Hogwarts, the course has been cursed. While unconfirmed, almost all wizards agree on this claim. The reason is that since that incident, every professor holding the position has left within a year for various reasons. Because of this, Hogwarts has had to recruit a new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor every year. 10 years ago, Voldemort disappeared because of Harry Potter, but the curse he left behind doesn't seem to have been lifted. The Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts still changes every year. The reasons for the professors leaving are varied: elderly family members or children to care for, a divorce with half the property, feeling incapable of handling the course, unexpected health problems. So when Professor Quirinus Quirrell volunteered to teach the course, Dumbledore and McGonagall agreed without hesitation. Professor Quirrell, a Ravenclaw graduate, was renowned for his exceptional talent during his student days. Although he had previously taught Muggle studies, his theoretical knowledge was exceptionally solid. After being appointed as the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Professor Quirrell wasn't content with just theory. He wanted first-hand practical experience. So, before the new term began, he dedicated time to accumulating practical experience in Defense Against the Dark Arts. His approach was supported and understood by the other professors, as practice is crucial for this course. However, when Quirrell traveled to the Dark Forest, he ran into trouble. Although he eventually escaped and returned to school, he seemed like a completely different person afterward. Everyone believed he was terrified by vampires and witches. He not only developed a stutter but also became afraid of everything, including his students, his cowardice and helplessness glaringly obvious. Yet, this very same timid and cowardly man was now intently staring at Harry. His gaze held a decisiveness and cruelty completely different from his usual persona. A slight smile played on his lips, somewhat resembling Sherlock's mocking expression when he mentioned Scotland Yard. Just Snape, if he could just hold on for a few more seconds, he could throw the little boy off his flying broomstick. No matter how many counter-charms Snape cast, it wouldn't matter. This was his confidence as a Ravenclaw, and his reliance on that person as a backer. He usually disguised himself so well, and with everyone's attention focused on the match, no one noticed Quirrell's unusual behavior. But precisely because of this, Quirrell himself didn't notice Hermione nearby. It wasn't until half a minute later, when a scream rang out, that he began to realize what had happened. Cursing under his breath, he quickly began to extinguish the flames on his body. At the same time, he was filled with doubt and uncertainty. Had he been exposed? The moment Quirrell stopped staring, Snape immediately gained the upper hand. With his help, Harry was able to quickly regain his balance. He always remembered Sherlock's instructions: once out of trouble, end the match quickly, and absolutely not give Quirrell a second chance. It could be said that Harry was truly lucky. Almost the instant he regained his mobility, he spotted his target and swooped down towards the ground. Before anyone else could react, he was already on the ground. To the astonishment of everyone present, Harry nimbly leaped down from his flying broomstick. He clenched his fist, raised it high above his head, and swung it vigorously. The whole process was fluid and graceful, a sight to behold. With Madame Hooch's whistle, the match ended. Harry instinctively looked towards the banner. Although it was too far to see clearly, he was sure Sherlock was watching him too. Unfortunately, he was mistaken. Sherlock's gaze was shifting between Snape and Quirrell. Judging from the result of this contest alone, Snape was no match for Quirrell. This meant that his previous deduction had been confirmed. At this moment, Lee Jordan loudly announced the result, with Harry catching the golden snitch. Gryffindor won by 170 to 40. Although the match was over, the scene remained chaotic. The Gryffindor players believed that Flint's collision had caused the problem with Harry's broomstick. Slytherin, of course, refused to admit it. Only dark magic could make flying brooms do that, and Flint didn't have that kind of ability. Even if Flint had used some underhanded tricks, they still couldn't admit it. Seeing the Gryffindor team, whom they had been dominating, turn the tables and the players swaggering around, they were extremely annoyed. So, their words inevitably turned to cursing and shoving. The expressions of both sides gradually became ferocious, their language increasingly offensive, and their actions increasingly violent, finally erupting into a conflict. As the players grappled, the spectators in the stands couldn't sit still any longer and jumped down to support their respective houses. "Let's go, let's go, let's go," with Sherlock's shout, Ron, Dean, and Seamus, their faces beaming, rushed down with him. Hermione and Neville hesitated for a moment, then followed Sherlock onto the field. Surprisingly, Sherlock didn't participate in the brawl. At his prompting, Hagrid found Harry immediately and led the four of them away. The giant's physique was there, and despite the chaotic scene, they moved forward without hindrance. "Sherlock, I thought you were calling us down to beat those guys up." I was already prepared to punch Malfoy in the nose. Upon arriving at Hagrid's golden room, Ron took the strong tea Hagrid offered and grumbled somewhat discontentedly. "It's pointless," Sherlock said calmly. "There are quite a few professors watching the match. Things will be under control soon." All right. Ron only made a subconscious complaint, but upon hearing Sherlock's explanation, he brought up another matter. "Sherlock, I still don't think Snape is a good person. I saw it clearly. His eyes were fixed on Harry, and he kept chanting spells without stopping. Impossible. Absolutely impossible." Hagrid was typically oblivious. Despite being in the stands, he was completely unaware of what was happening around him. Hearing Ron say this, he naturally objected strongly. Why would Professor Snape do that? He had absolutely no reason to harm Harry. Ron scratched his head. Maybe because he's Harry's father's rival, Merlin's beard. Hagrid stared at Harry in surprise. "Harry, which bastard told you that?" "I'm going to beat that gossipy guy up." "Nobody told me that," Harry said proudly. It was Sherlock's deduction. As it turned out, Sherlock's deduction was proven correct once again. Oh, that gluttonous monster with a dripping mouth. Hagrid had already witnessed Sherlock's abilities, but he still couldn't help but exclaim upon hearing this news. He stared at Sherlock for a long time before slowly saying, "You're almost as perceptive as Dumbledore, but even so, Professor Snape would never harm Harry." Sherlock glanced at Ron. "He said that, I didn't, Ron. Also, according to my deduction, Professor Snape was actually trying to protect Harry, but unfortunately, he was no match for Professor Quirrell, who..." Hagrid suddenly felt his brain wasn't working properly. "Who did you say?" "Quirinus Quirrell, the Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts," Sherlock said calmly. "Thanks to the user for the 100 Kidian coins, your support is my motivation to update. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62: The Hound of the Baskervilles. When Sherlock said that Quirrell was the one who wanted to harm Harry, Hagrid was immediately shocked. Wait, why do you all always suspect the Hogwarts professors? First it was Snape, and now it's Quirrell. This is impossible. Before Hagrid could finish speaking, Sherlock interrupted him. It was Professor Quirrell. He's the one who released that troll on Halloween, Hagrid. Oh, by the way, that night he was going to check the mechanism protecting the Philosopher's Stone, but Professor Snape stopped him. And Professor Snape, whom Ron suspected, almost had his leg bitten off by your big dog, Hagrid. This time, it wasn't just Hagrid whose eyes widened. All four of them stared wide-eyed. Whetstone, Snape stopped Quirrell, running Gorgon. How do you know Fluffy, Sherlock? How many more things are you hiding from us? Meeting the four questioning gazes, Sherlock sighed deeply. Seeing this, he understood that without explaining things clearly, the conversation couldn't continue. The Philosopher's Stone is a substance with special properties, and it's also a key ingredient in the elixir of immortality, Sherlock said, turning to Harry. My friend, if you remember the wizard cards in the Chocolate Frog, you should recall the description of Dumbledore. Sorry, I don't remember, Harry said sheepishly. Sherlock shrugged. Dumbledore's well-known contributions include defeating the Dark Wizard Grindelwald in 1945, discovering 12 uses for dragon blood, and his fruitful collaboration with his partner Nicholas Flamel in alchemy. Under the stunned gazes of the four, Sherlock recited this passage verbatim. Sherlock, how did you remember all this? Harry was bewildered. Yes, he had indeed seen the wizard cards, and the description of Dumbledore had left a deep impression. But asking him to recite it completely after more than 2 months was simply impossible. I remember telling you before that the human brain is like an empty attic. If you choose to discard the useless things, you can naturally remember the information you need. You can do the same. Faced with Sherlock's matter-of-fact statement, the four looked at each other, speechless for a moment. That kind of thing, perhaps only you could do? The achievements with Nicholas Flamel in alchemy refer to the Philosopher's Stone. Sherlock then turned to Hagrid, abruptly asking, Fluffy is your hound, right? Still in shock, Hagrid subconsciously answered, yes, Fluffy's very loyal. I bought it from a guy I met at the hotel last year. His name was Baskerville, I think, and then I lent it to Dumbledore to guard the Philosopher's Stone. He stopped abruptly. You deduce that too? Hagrid could no longer sit still. He jumped up, his eyes wide like saucers, his voice trembling slightly. This first-year wizard is terrifying. Half is deduction, the other half is what Dumbledore told me. Sherlock was quite satisfied with Hagrid's honesty, resting his chin on his hands and looking at him intently. The Hound of the Baskervilles? That sounds interesting. Hearing that Dumbledore had told Sherlock the information, Hagrid breathed a slight sigh of relief. Thank goodness, if all this information was deduced by Sherlock, then he would have been far too exaggerated. But then again, it was already quite impressive for a first-year student to have done this much. And also, how come Dumbledore told Sherlock everything? After briefly explaining to Hagrid and his three friends, Sherlock gave a concluding speech. From Snape and Quirrell's actions today, 3 things can be confirmed. First, Quirrell is indeed Voldemort's henchman. Hearing this name, Hagrid and Ron simultaneously gasped, their bodies trembling. Harry and Hermione remained unmoved, and Sherlock, equally unfazed, continued. Second, Quirrell, or rather Voldemort, wanted the Philosopher's Stone. By the way, Hagrid, he was the one who broke into Gringotts. Huh? Hagrid's eyes widened again. Before he could react, Sherlock explained, Harry told me you met at the Leaky Cauldron. Before Hagrid could grasp the connection, Sherlock continued, third, Professor Snape is no match for Professor Quirrell. Why do you say that? This time, Hermione asked. Professor Snape is a potions master, while Quirrell seems timid and hesitant. Don't be fooled by appearances, Hermione. Quirrell's strength far surpasses his appearance. Even after Snape began to break the spell, Quirrell could still control his flying broomstick with a silent charm. It wasn't until you interfered with his spellcasting that Professor Snape gained the upper hand. Of course, destruction is always easier than protection. After Sherlock's words, everyone in the hut fell silent. 2 months into the school year, even Harry and Hermione, who grew up in the Muggle world, had a clear understanding of Voldemort's power. Hearing that even a Hogwarts professor had become his henchman was naturally hard to accept. "Sherlock, you said Professor Dumbledore already knows about this, right?" Hermione suddenly asked. "Yes." Seeing Sherlock's affirmative answer, he immediately smiled. "Then it's alright. Even during the Wizarding Wars, Hogwarts was the only safe place. Everyone says that Professor Dumbledore is the only person Voldemort fears." Hearing Hermione's words, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. That's right, as long as Headmaster Dumbledore was at Hogwarts, Quirrell wouldn't dare to act recklessly. As for today's events, wasn't it something Sherlock had discussed with Dumbledore beforehand? Now that he's surfaced, there's nothing to worry about. Having figured this out, Hagrid's hut was filled with a cheerful atmosphere. With the end of the Quidditch match, Harry's fame soared. Already the savior of the wizarding world, he gained a new title, Quidditch Genius. Of course, neither the troll in the basement on Halloween nor the flying broomsticks in the Quidditch arena spread. This led to a significant increase in Sherlock's reputation, besides Harry's. The version circulating among teachers and students was that Sherlock deduced Hermione was in the girls' restroom based on Professor Quirrell's actions on Halloween. Not only that, he acted immediately, rescuing Hermione from the troll. This courageous act naturally earned him the admiration of the Gryffindor Lions. Furthermore, his deductive reasoning skills also attracted the attention of the Ravenclaw Eagles. After the wizarding duel incident, some students had already begun consulting Sherlock. However, most were students from their own house, and the questions were relatively simple. But after this incident, people from other houses gradually started seeking Sherlock's advice. "Thanks to Adu for the 5,000 Kidian coins. Your support is my motivation to update." Chapter 63 They are all my customers. One Monday morning, after his history of magic class, Sherlock saw off several upperclassmen Ravenclaw students who had come to see him. When he returned to the classroom, he was met with surprised looks from his classmates. "They're all my customers," Sherlock explained before they could ask. "Customers?" The students exchanged bewildered glances. Calling classmates customers seemed rather odd. "Ever since the Halloween incident, people have started coming to me. I have to thank Mr. Neville Longbottom for that. The first few customers found me through his referrals." Neville. The students turned to look at Neville. He was stroking the toad he had just found, and upon hearing Sherlock's praise, he lowered his head shyly. "After I successfully helped them, more and more people came to me for help. Actually, these troublesome things for them were just a matter of needing guidance. I listened carefully to their experiences, they listened to my advice, and once the problem was solved, the money went into my pocket." Hearing Sherlock say this, the group of friends understood why he called these classmates customers, although they found it somewhat unbelievable. Considering Sherlock's abilities, they suddenly realized it wasn't incomprehensible. "If only I could be as clever as Sherlock Holmes," Seamus said enviously. "Even Ravenclaw students come to you, it's truly amazing." As everyone knows, Ravenclaw represents wisdom. When the Ravenclaw Hawks came to consult Sherlock, it naturally meant that his wisdom had been recognized by that group of people who were always proud and arrogant. Even Hermione Granger, who is already known as the know-it-all, didn't receive such treatment. Since today's history of magic class ended relatively early, everyone wasn't in a hurry to eat, so they chatted for a while longer. "Speaking of which, I just learned that Morpheus passed away yesterday," Dean said with a regretful expression. "Who?" Everyone exchanged bewildered glances. "Freddie Mercury. Haven't any of you heard of him?" Seamus, seeing his friend's question fail to resonate, couldn't help but explain again. "Freddie Mercury? Is he some famous wizard?" Neville asked timidly. "I've never heard of the Mercury family." Hermione pondered for a moment, then looked at Ron. "What about you?" Ron shrugged. "Me neither." Freddie Mercury, an Asian British male singer, lead singer of Queen. Sherlock's words, though seemingly silent, stunned everyone present. Seamus looked at him incredulously. "Holmes, you actually know Mercury?" In his view, aside from Weasley and Longbottom, his classmates from wizarding families, both Potter and Granger should know more about Mercury than Holmes. But the truth was, only Holmes knew him. Not to mention Sherlock's three friends. They knew Sherlock's character all too well. He was someone who didn't even know the Earth revolves around the sun. How could someone like that know about a band and its lead singer? "Queen, are they famous?" Neville raised his hand and asked again, weakly. "Famous." The moment the topic turned to music, Dean instantly transformed from his usual sleepy demeanor in class, launching into a long, enthusiastic explanation. Queen was formed in London in 1971 and immediately released their self-titled debut album, Queen. Their 1975 release, A Night at the Opera, brought them commercial success, with Bohemian Rhapsody winning the first Brit Award for Best British Single. Their 1977 release, News of the World, was hugely influential, especially the singles We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions, which were widely used in sporting events from the 1980s onward. Their 1981 compilation album, Greatest Hits, sold over 6 million copies, becoming the best-selling album in the UK. Just last year, they received the Brit Award for Outstanding Musical Achievement. Watching Dean excitedly sharing his knowledge, the students were all surprised. Was this really the same dark-skinned guy they knew? He seemed like a completely different person. Only Seamus showed no surprise at Dean's reaction, continuing his friend's line of thought. Queen fused glam rock, progressive rock, classical music, and heavy metal into one, influencing almost every heavy metal band of the late 20th century. He suddenly paused, then exclaimed with a look of sudden realization, I understand why Holmes knew about Morpheus. Dean said you play the violin very well. His words immediately caught the attention of Harry, Ron, and Neville, who shared a dorm with Sherlock. Right, since Sherlock played the violin so well, it wasn't surprising he knew about such a famous band. What? You can play the violin? Only Hermione looked surprised. It was the first time she'd heard of this. I heard he died of pneumonia caused by AIDS at only 45 years old. What a pity. Yes, his incredibly wide range spanning 4 octaves and his soaring, brilliant tone were simply beautiful. Ron and Neville exchanged bewildered glances. Bands in the Muggle world were definitely outside their area of knowledge. Harry and Hermione weren't much better off. However, when Seamus and Dean sang We Will Rock You, they realized they had both heard the song before. As for Sherlock, although Queen didn't have a dedicated violinist, as Seamus had said, many of their pieces incorporated classical music elements. This explained why he, a violinist himself, knew Queen. The group then suggested returning to their dormitory and asking Sherlock to play a piece. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Looking up, they saw a little witch enter. She had 2 golden braids and a slightly flushed face. Abbott, what brings you here? Hermione asked in surprise upon seeing her. This little girl was Hannah Abbott of Hufflepuff. Because she was the first to wear the sorting hat at the sorting ceremony, Hermione remembered her quite well. Granger, you're here too. That's wonderful. Abbott seemed pleased to see Hermione, and then said, I've come to see Mr. Holmes. As he spoke, his gaze unconsciously drifted towards Sherlock's direction. Seeing this, the others understood and smiled as they stood up to leave. Hermione was the last to leave, but just as she was about to step out, Abbott suddenly reached out and grabbed her arm, pleading, Granger, please don't leave, please. Hermione was somewhat surprised and looked at Sherlock. Hermione, if you would sit for a while, you might be able to help me a great deal. Hermione had been quite interested in Abbott's visit to Sherlock, but she felt a little embarrassed to be left alone after everyone else had left. But now that Sherlock and Abbott had said so, she sat down. All right, Miss Abbott, can you tell me what's troubling you? How did you know I'm troubled? Hannah Abbott asked in surprise. Thank you to offer the 100 Kidian coins, to Fengxing Xiangxiu Lirixu for the 100 Kidian coins, and to Lubian Dideka Xiao for the 100 Kidian coins. Your support is my motivation to update. Chapter 64 Hannah Abbott's Troubles. Knock 4 times when you knock, ordinary people knock twice, 3 at most. Sherlock said this when Hannah Abbott asked how he knew she was troubled. Holmes, you truly live up to your reputation, Hannah Abbott exclaimed in surprise. Indeed, she was troubled. Well then, let's get started. Sherlock rested his chin on his hands, his eyes fixed intently on the young witch. Hannah Abbott nodded, took a deep breath, and began to recount the events. My father works at the Ministry of Magic, in charge of document management. A few days ago, while organizing a batch of secret documents, he may have been careless and misplaced one document. As a result, someone in the Ministry of Magic used this to accuse him of deliberately leaking secrets. Now he faces serious disciplinary action, and might even be imprisoned in Azkaban. At this point, Hannah Abbott's eyes reddened, and her voice trembled. Sherlock didn't notice this, or perhaps he did but didn't care. He opened his notebook and continued, when your father mentioned this document, did he say anything special? Remember, any detail, even the seemingly insignificant one, could be crucial. Father said the document was enchanted with a special magic key, and could only be opened with a specific magical key. Where was the document placed? Locked in a safe with multiple layers of protective magic. Are you sure? Yes, that's what my father said when questioned by the Ministry of Magic, but it just suddenly appeared elsewhere. Hearing this, Sherlock frowned slightly, tapping his fingers lightly on the table. After a moment, he pressed further. Before the document was discovered, did anything unusual happen at the Ministry of Magic? Unusual. Hannah Abbott didn't quite understand Sherlock's meaning. For example, did anyone frequently enter and leave your father's office, or were any strange magical fluctuations detected? Hannah Abbott closed her eyes, her brow furrowed, trying to recall. Sherlock didn't disturb her, simply watching her quietly. Hermione glanced at Hannah Abbott, then at Sherlock, the former deep in thought and the latter confident, creating a stark contrast. That's right, Hannah Abbott's eyes suddenly lit up. Father said that a few days before the documents went missing, the protective magic circle in his office inexplicably fluctuated briefly. But he checked it carefully and found nothing unusual, so he didn't think much of it. Sherlock nodded, turning to Hermione. My friend, if someone tried to use magic to bypass the safe's protection and steal the documents, wouldn't it cause a magical fluctuation? That's for sure, Hermione answered without hesitation, then realized, you mean, wait a minute, I have a few more questions. Hermione wasn't annoyed by Sherlock's interruption, she was already used to this kind of behavior. This guy was just like that. Sherlock then began to question Abbott in detail about the layout of the Ministry of Magic office, the location of the documents, and her father's daily work processes. Abbott had often run to the Ministry of Magic to play with her father since she was little, and could answer most of Sherlock's questions, though she wasn't clear on the details. It's alright, Mother managed to get me the Ministry of Magic's investigation report on this matter, and this letter, which is Father's description of the incident, Abbott said, handing over a stack of materials. Sherlock, who had been frowning, suddenly brightened. Abbott's description could only be used as a reference. This report and Abbott's father's testimony were much more useful. He carefully examined them and began sketching in his notebook. Unfortunately, he couldn't go to the Ministry of Magic to investigate in person. It seemed he would have to follow Poirot's example this time. Fortunately, the Ministry of Magic's report was quite detailed, although there were still some unclear points, but it was enough to deduce the truth. I think, the truth has surfaced. Under Hermione and Abbott's surprised gazes, Sherlock looked up and said, "This was too fast. This person is likely your father's rival in the Ministry of Magic. He has long coveted your father's position and seized this opportunity to orchestrate this conspiracy. Mr. Holmes, who are you talking about?" Abbott's expression was somewhat confused. She was genuinely taken aback by Sherlock's sudden remark. "Right, Black, Mr. Blacklight, him." Hannah immediately looked surprised. "He didn't have any enmity with my father." Sherlock shook his head and explained, "Based on your father's description and the information provided in this report, the encryption method used on this document is an extremely rare and complex ancient magical encryption technique. Anyone who can crack it must have a deep understanding of ancient magic. There aren't many people who meet that requirement, and Mr. Wright Black happens to be one of them. In addition, the safe's protective magic requires cracking at least 3 different types of magical locks simultaneously to open it. This not only requires superb magical abilities, but also a thorough understanding of the internal structure of the Ministry of Magic's security system. Wright Black happens to be in charge of the security system in the area where your father works, which makes him very suspicious. Besides, Sherlock picked up his notebook, pointed to the sketch he had drawn, and continued, "According to this investigation report, in the week before the document went missing, Mr. Blacklight entered and exited your father's office more often than usual, and each time he stayed for a considerable amount of time. Of course, he claimed that this was only to discuss work, but your father said that most of the so-called discussions were trivial matters. This is enough to show that he was probably using these opportunities to find the best time to implement his plan, but your father just didn't notice. Also, he has always been jealous of your father's talent. This is my deduction, but I think it's probably true. Because in the most recent promotion selection, he lost to your father, which undoubtedly became a strong motive for his crime." Abbott was both surprised and delighted after hearing Sherlock's analysis. Hermione gently patted the back of her hand, her eyes also sparkling as she looked at Sherlock. "Holmes, you're amazing. What should we do now?" "Don't worry, Miss Abbott. We still need to gather evidence to prove your father's innocence and that person's crimes. Although the Ministry of Magic has restricted your father's movements, thankfully your mother is still free. So, we need to have her and your father's friends at the Ministry keep an eye on that person's movements, especially looking for any magical traces related to documents that he might try to destroy, or any contact with suspicious individuals. Also, I suggest you tell Professor Sprout about this. I believe she can provide you with considerable assistance. Meanwhile, I will use some methods to further search for evidence. He then turned to her. Hermione, please look into information about ancient magic deciphering and vulnerabilities in the Ministry of Magic's security system. Perhaps we can find crucial clues to his crimes. Hermione was taken aback. Ancient magic deciphering was one thing, but what was this about vulnerabilities in the Ministry of Magic's security system? Could such things even be investigated? Hannah Abbott, however, didn't think much of it, her eyes reddening as she expressed her gratitude to Sherlock. Sherlock gave her a reassuring smile. Miss Abbott, the truth will never be buried. As long as we search diligently, we will surely find it. Thank you to Shadow Solon 03141043WLW for the 500 Kidian coins donation. Your support is my motivation to update. Chapter 65 The Magical World also has Scotland Yard. After seeing Hannah Abbott off, Hermione sat opposite Sherlock, staring intently at him. What's wrong, my friend, Detective Sherlock? Where can I find loopholes in the Ministry of Magic's security system? Well, Sherlock shook his head slightly. I've already found some from the case reports the Ministry provided earlier. Huh? Hermione looked at Sherlock in disbelief. Unfortunately, even if I know about these loopholes, I can't exploit them. After all, this is the wizarding world. If I were 20, 17 would be enough. Hermione, what? Judging from your tone, you're planning to pull off a big heist at the Ministry of Magic? But what I really didn't expect is that the wizarding world actually has its own Scotland Yard. If it were Harry and Ron, they might not understand the meaning of this sentence. Hermione, however, understood. It seems you're quite dissatisfied with Scotland Yard. Actually, they do have a certain level of efficiency and basic investigative ability. When handling routine cases, they can methodically collect clues and conduct interviews. Unfortunately, many of their detectives are rather rigid in their thinking, often following established investigative models and lacking innovative thinking and bold reasoning. Especially when facing complex crimes, Scotland Yard's response speed and strategies are often inadequate. For example, in the burglary before the start of the school year, they overlooked crucial clues, which led to a stalemate in the investigation. Hearing Sherlock bluntly point out Scotland Yard's shortcomings, Hermione was momentarily speechless. She had sometimes heard her parents and other elders complain about Scotland Yard's inefficiency, but no one had ever pointed out the problem as clearly as Sherlock. What I didn't expect was that the Ministry of Magic was just as capable. Actually, this case is very simple, just like how I've helped others solve problems before. Because I have this ability to analyze things intuitively, they provided me with all the evidence, and I then tried to put them on the right track. In fact, all crimes have very similarities. It would be strange if you could know the details of 1,000 cases but couldn't explain the 1,001st one. If it's a complex case, I'm afraid I'd have to go through the trouble of investigating it myself. The main difficulty in this case is that there are too many clues, and the most important clues are obscured by completely unrelated signs. In fact, the information provided by the Ministry of Magic's report alone is enough to make inferences. You just need to select the necessary ones and connect them in order. But the Ministry of Magic turns a blind eye to those clues hidden beneath the surface. In fact, the Ministry of Magic gives me the impression that it just wants to close the case as quickly as possible. Sherlock frowned deeply as he said this. As for who the real culprit is, they don't care. So even though I've provided the correct line of thought, I'm afraid Mrs. Abbott will still have to put in a lot of effort to resolve this matter. However, since we were able to bring out the Ministry of Magic's investigation report, and with Professor Sprout's help, I'm sure this matter will eventually reach a fair outcome. Sherlock paused here. Oh, and thank you for reminding me of that lady's name earlier. Goodness, so if I hadn't called out Hannah Abbott's name from the beginning, you wouldn't even know? But then again, that makes sense. This guy had said before that his brain was like a small attic, never storing information that he considered useless. Forgetting classmates' names wasn't a one-off occurrence. Hermione even suspected that if Ron hadn't shared a dormitory with Sherlock, the latter might not have remembered the former's name either. Time slips away like sand through fingers. in the process of learning and mastering magical knowledge, leading Harry in morning exercises, teaching Hermione to fly, and helping classmates solve problems, Sherlock had been at Hogwarts for almost 4 months. This also meant Christmas was coming. Like Halloween, this festival, originally of religious origin, has evolved into a public holiday in the Western world. On this day, everyone exchanges gifts and holds feasts. To add to the atmosphere, Christmas trees, stockings, Santa hats, wreaths, and other festive decorations make their appearance. It's quite a lively occasion. For the young wizards at Hogwarts, this festival is even more important than Halloween. Firstly, its arrival signifies the end of the first term. The entire school enjoys a full 2-week holiday, returning to school on New Year's Day of the following year. Secondly, the children eagerly await the appearance of an old man in a red hat and white beard to deliver gifts. Of course, in the magical world, this role is actually played by owls. But this doesn't diminish the children's hopes. The school prepares well in advance, having all students register whether they want to stay on campus for the holiday. The vast majority of students choose to go home. This is understandable, as they only have 2 opportunities to go home each year during their 7 years of school life. Of course, there are exceptions. I really feel sorry for those people, Malfoy said sarcastically during a potions class. They have to spend Christmas at other people's houses because their own families don't want them. Despite repeated setbacks, Malfoy still seized every opportunity to antagonize Harry. Of course, because of Sherlock, he didn't dare to be too blatant, only causing trouble subtly. By now, he had discovered a fact: if he only gained some minor verbal advantage, Sherlock wouldn't pay him any attention. This discovery excited him immensely. So, he naturally wouldn't let this opportunity slip by. However, this time, not only Sherlock, but even Harry couldn't be bothered to acknowledge him. Because Harry didn't want to go back to Privet Drive to spend Christmas with the Dursleys in the first place. So even though Malfoy deliberately looked at Harry while speaking, and Crabbe and Goyle kept chuckling beside him, Harry wasn't sad at all. He even found it somewhat amusing. This made Malfoy even more gloomy, as if he had punched cotton. On the contrary, for Harry, this might very well be the best Christmas he had ever experienced. Actually, when Professor McGonagall first came to register the students staying at school for the holidays, he originally intended to sign his name. Sherlock, I won't be going home for Christmas. No, you're going home, Harry said in surprise. Sherlock, you know my family situation. Back to my home, Sherlock said calmly. My parents want to meet my friends. Chapter 66: A Christmas with a Cold. Sherlock, you've got a surprise for me today, haven't you? Harry's eyes widened in surprise at Sherlock's invitation. Staying at Hogwarts was already a great option for him. He never expected Sherlock to invite him home for the new year. This was definitely a pleasant surprise. Sherlock nodded, then turned to Ron. And you, Ron? Ron was taken aback, pointing to himself. Me? Yes, you don't have to stay at school either. Come to my house with Harry. But Ron doesn't need to stay at school, does he? Hermione asked, somewhat puzzled. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley are going to Romania to visit Charlie Weasley, and Ron and his 3 brothers will be staying at school this time. How do you know? Ron's eyes widened even more than Harry's had been. I haven't even told you yet. Sherlock smiled slightly at him. Are you sure you want to know? Oh, never mind. It's probably just deduction from observation, Ron said dejectedly. Every time he heard Sherlock's reasoning process, he felt his intelligence being crushed. So, unless absolutely necessary, it was best to skip the process. Besides, even if Sherlock hadn't said anything, he had already vaguely guessed some things. After all, just a few days ago, he had sent a letter home by owl. With Sherlock's observational skills, deducing these things was incredibly easy. In short, at Sherlock's invitation, Harry and Ron would be spending their Christmas holidays at Sherlock's house. Out of a desire to show off, Ron quickly inadvertently spread the word. After all, Sherlock was quite a figure at school these days. Although he had an eccentric personality and often offended people with his words, his ability to deduce what someone had done the day before just by looking at them was admired by all the young wizards. Moreover, as long as one could ignore his unpleasant side and focus on consulting him, it was actually quite pleasant. Under these circumstances, receiving an invitation from him was undoubtedly something to be proud of. Sorry, I shouldn't have told anyone. Achoo, Ron said in a muffled voice, listening to Malfoy's mockery of Harry. With the holidays just around the corner, Ron had caught a cold, and even his voice sounded different. "It's all right," Sherlock calmly said before Harry could even speak. "Why apologize? You were just stating a fact, Ron." Oh, this was the first time Ron had ever heard Sherlock speak so kindly. He instantly straightened his back. "Right, it was Malfoy who made the mistake. What did it have to do with me, Ronald?" Potter, whispering during class, 5 points deducted from Gryffindor. By now, Harry was completely used to being penalized for various reasons. Especially after hearing Sherlock explain Professor Snape's true feelings during the first potions class, Harry's gaze towards him was completely different. He was, after all, a kind child, and after knowing the truth, of course he chose to forgive him. So at this moment, he was completely nonchalant. This only made Snape angrier. Just as he was still engrossed in turning Gryffindor into Gryffindor, potions class ended. As everyone left the underground classroom, they were astonished to find the corridor ahead completely blocked by a massive fir tree. At first, they were a little confused, but when they saw 2 large feet under the tree and heard the loud panting, they immediately understood who was behind it. In the entire Hogwarts, only one person could do this job without magic, relying solely on their physical strength. Ron curiously peeked his head through the branches and, sure enough, saw a familiar face with a full beard. "Hey, Hagrid, help." "No, I can manage on my own, thank you, Ron, get out of the way, a good dog doesn't block the way." Just as the two were exchanging pleasantries, Malfoy's voice came from behind Ron. "I bet you're just trying to earn some pocket money, Weasley? Or maybe you're hoping to work as a gamekeeper after graduating from Hogwarts? After all, Hagrid's cottage is practically a palace compared to your old place." It has to be said, Malfoy is quite adept at being sarcastic. And after hearing Sherlock's analysis last time, Ron had actually had that thought. So, unsurprisingly, he was enraged by Malfoy. But just as he was about to charge at Malfoy, Sherlock stopped him. Mr. Draco Malfoy. When he saw Sherlock's gaze on him, Malfoy trembled. At this moment, he once again recalled the fear of being dominated by Sherlock that day. Even though he wasn't the one who got beaten up. "Not just the wheel eyes, Hagrid's cottage is also a palace compared to yours." Ron, who had been smiling, suddenly froze. "Wait, buddy, why are you stabbing your own people in the back while humiliating your enemy? Holmes, you, fall into pit, again in your wit." Malfoy wasn't a fool like Oil. So when Sherlock's grey eyes looked over, he abruptly shut his mouth halfway through his sentence, then lowered his head and quickly left. A wise man doesn't fight a losing battle. He had to endure. Crabbe and Goyle, seeing this, followed him closely. "Sherlock, you really shouldn't have stopped me, I almost taught him a lesson." "Achoo," Ron said through gritted teeth, his face as red as his hair, watching Malfoy's retreating figure. Sherlock shook his head and looked to the side. "That way, you wouldn't have been able to teach him a lesson, and you'd have lost points." Following Sherlock's gaze, everyone gasped. Professor Snape had appeared on the stairs at some point. Although, thanks to Sherlock's explanation, everyone believed he wasn't a bad person. But, if Ron had really rushed up there, he, not Malfoy, would have been the one in trouble. Professor Snape approached slowly, his gaze sweeping over Ron as he coldly said, "You should be grateful, Weasley. If Holmes hadn't stopped you, Gryffindor would have lost more points for hitting someone." "Sherlock, thank goodness you saw it," Harry said admiringly as Professor Snape turned to leave. "No, Sherlock, you have to find a chance for me to give that kid a good beating." Ron spat on the ground, looking at Sherlock expectantly. He believed that with Sherlock's abilities, creating such an opportunity wouldn't be difficult. However, to his surprise, Sherlock bluntly stated, "You're no match for him, Ron." Greek letter epsilon equals angry equals angry equals angry equals. "Oh, how could I?" Cough 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 cough. Ron coughed even more incessantly, his anxiety rising. "All right, cheer up, Christmas is almost here." Hagrid slapped Ron on the shoulder, silencing his grumbling and coughing. "You guys should come with me to the Great Hall, it's absolutely wonderful. Everyone's been busy with the New Year holidays these past few days and probably haven't had time to read. But I'll still guarantee 2 chapters a day during the holidays, at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Merry Christmas to the characters in the book, and Happy Chinese New Year to all readers." Chapter 67: A Thoughtful Gift. Led by Hagrid, Sherlock and his 3 friends arrived at the Great Hall. Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick were already setting up the Christmas decorations. Seeing them arrive, Professor Flitwick immediately greeted them warmly. "Ah, the last tree has been brought in, Hagrid. Could you please put it in that corner over there?" Once the decorations were complete, the walls were adorned with cascading ribbons of holly and mistletoe, and 12 towering Christmas trees stood around the hall. Some trees were decorated with glittering icicles, some with hundreds of candles, and others were beautiful enough on their own. In short, the Great Hall was even more beautiful and magnificent than it had been for Halloween. "Tomorrow is the official start of the holidays," Hagrid said, turning to Harry. "I heard you're going to Sherlock's." "Yes, Hagrid," Harry replied with a happy smile. "Sherlock invited Ron and me." "That's wonderful." Hagrid was genuinely happy that Harry had found a friend like Sherlock. He placed his hands on Sherlock and Harry's shoulders. "I bet this is the best Christmas you've ever had." Harry nodded, agreeing. However, since news had spread that Sherlock was going home for the holidays, many young wizards were coming to see him. It felt like they wanted to get their fortunes told again. Under these circumstances, Harry, Hermione, and Ron met at an empty classroom. "Ron, are you sure Sherlock didn't follow us?" "Probably not. He was stopped by that Ravenclaw girl." "That's good. We need to settle this before we leave school." "Harry, you..." Hermione was about to speak to Harry when she noticed his gaze was still fixed on something behind him. "Don't look. Sherlock won't be here anytime soon." Okay." Harry blushed and quickly looked away. "Let's discuss what Christmas present we should give Sherlock." "Actually, I still think we should just ask Sherlock directly," Ron muttered, but when two cold gazes fell upon him, he promptly shut his mouth. One was a savior, the other a top student. He couldn't afford to offend either of them. "I recently compiled some information during my free time. Take a look and see if you have anything to add," Hermione said, pushing a sheet of paper in front of them. On it, written in neat handwriting, were the following: Sherlock Holmes's scope of knowledge. 1. Literary and philosophical knowledge, none. 2. Astronomical knowledge, none, slightly improved after taking astronomy classes. 3. Political knowledge, superficial. 4. Botanical knowledge, limited, completely ignorant of practical horticulture, but knowledgeable about poisons and dangerous magical creatures. 5. Geographical knowledge, limited to practical use, able to distinguish different soil types at a glance, and able to determine the location on campus based on the color and hardness of mud splattered on his robes during walks. 6. Chemistry knowledge, profound. 7. Anatomical knowledge, accurate, but unsystematic. 8. Thrillers, very extensive, familiar with almost all the horrific events of the last century. 9. Possesses rich and practical knowledge of English law. 10. Magical knowledge, leaning towards practicality, familiar with transfiguration, charms, potions, and herbalism theory and practice, familiar with magical history only in areas of interest, defense against the dark arts ability unknown. 11. Plays the violin very well, but never quite properly. After reading Hermione's summary, Harry and Ron exchanged bewildered glances. "You actually know Sherlock so well?" Harry asked first, genuinely impressed by Hermione. He'd known Sherlock for so long, yet she'd never summarized him so accurately. "Don't worry about the details," Hermione said impatiently. "Anything else to add?" "Yes," Harry said decisively. "Sherlock is skilled with clubs and proficient in swordsmanship and boxing." "Oh?" Hermione and Ron both looked at Harry. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Harry felt a little embarrassed by their intense gazes. "Stop talking nonsense, just tell me how you know," Ron punched Harry. Hermione didn't speak, but her eyes clearly conveyed the same meaning. Harry cleared his throat. "From the first day of school, I've been practicing with Sherlock every morning." Ron's eyes widened like saucers. "What the hell? Why didn't you call me?" Harry immediately glared back. "I called you on the first day, and you said you couldn't get up." Ron was a little embarrassed, but quickly retorted. "Then why didn't you call me after that?" "Just because I didn't go on the first day doesn't mean I won't go later." "You..." Harry was so angry he was about to jump up and down when Hermione interrupted. "You two calm down for a bit." "Harry, did you find out he's good with clubs and swords when you were practicing with Sherlock?" "That's right," Harry nodded. "Actually, before school started, Sherlock had already said he had studied boxing and fencing, like the time he fought Malfoy and the other two in the carriage." "Oh, so he told me he convinced them." "Is that how he convinced them?" Hermione's eyebrows immediately shot up. Seeing this, Harry and Ron immediately felt a sense of foreboding. Harry quickly said, let's discuss what gift to give him first," Hermione snorted. Business was more important, so they stopped discussing the past. After some discussion, the three finally decided on a gift for Sherlock. Harry's gift was a magical magnifying glass. Besides the functions of a regular magnifying glass, it could also detect magical traces and discover special runes and magical fluctuations on magical items. If Hogwarts ever experienced a theft of magical items or a discovery of magical creatures, this magnifying glass could help Sherlock examine the scene more closely. This was also inspired by the Hannah Abbott incident. Not long ago, Hannah Abbott had personally sought out and thanked Sherlock. Her father had finally been cleared of suspicion and his reputation restored. It was just that the process had been somewhat convoluted. Even with new evidence, the Ministry of Magic was still unwilling to reopen the case. Just as Sherlock had predicted, they only needed a result. Whether that result was the truth or not, they didn't care. Fortunately, Abbott's mother had found someone. As a result, Wright Black would face legal punishment. This incident further enhanced Sherlock's reputation at Hogwarts, leading to even more people seeking his advice. Ron planned to give Sherlock invisible ink and a special quill. This ink only became visible under specific magical spells or reagents, making it convenient for him to conceal important information and also a useful tool for reconnaissance. As for Hermione, he planned to give Sherlock a book. Everyone's been busy with the Lunar New Year these past few days and probably hasn't had time to read. However, I'll still guarantee 2 chapters a day during the holiday. At 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Merry Christmas to the characters in the book, and Happy Chinese New Year to all readers. Finally, thank you to the user for the 100 Kidian coins reward. Your support is my motivation to update. Chapter 68 Need for Speed. Hermione had prepared a copy of the Case Book of Magical Crimes for Sherlock. This book collected various crime cases from the magical world, compiled by magical law scholars based on their research and practical experience. Hermione thought it would be a suitable reference book for Sherlock, allowing him to understand the characteristics of magical crimes and learn investigative techniques from past cases. After finalizing the arrangement, the three returned casually, only to find Sherlock still with the Ravenclaw witch. Having been in a hurry to leave earlier and not paying attention, Hermione suddenly noticed that the girl with Sherlock was surprisingly beautiful. She had long, flowing black hair, a pretty face, and was the kind of girl who would leave a lasting impression. When she saw Harry, Ron, and the others approaching, she politely smiled at them and waved goodbye to Sherlock. For some reason, Harry's heart skipped a beat. What a nice girl, don't you think, buddy? After the girl left, Ron whistled and nudged Harry with his elbow. Yes, I think so. Hermione glanced at the two of them and snorted. She vaguely understood why Harry had blushed earlier. Sherlock, is she also here to ask you a question? Just a minor inconvenience, Sherlock said calmly. On the morning of the holiday, the Hogwarts Express arrived as scheduled. Sherlock, Harry, Hermione, and Ron occupied a compartment. This scene made Sherlock slightly dazed. 4 months ago, he had taken the Hogwarts Express, knocking on the door of the Wizarding World. 4 months later, he was on the same train as his friends from the Wizarding World, returning to the scientific world. It felt like a lifetime had passed. The journey itself was uneventful. After all, at this time of year, everyone was eager to go home for the new year. As for the Malfoy trio, although they were also on the same train, they didn't come to provoke him like they had at the start of the school year. This left Ron somewhat disappointed. He had originally wanted to prove to his 3 friends that he wouldn't lose to Malfoy in a one-on-one fight. That afternoon, the train stopped at King's Station, platform 9 3/4. A gaunt old guard stood watch at the ticket gate. His task was to allow only 2 or 3 people through at a time. This was obviously to avoid a large group of people emerging from the walls at once and attracting the attention of the Muggles. During this time, people kept greeting Sherlock and Harry. Bye-bye, Holmes. Goodbye, Potter. You're both big names. Ron couldn't help but laugh. Harry shook his head. Not where I'm going, I promise you. Sherlock didn't comment. He and Hermione went first, followed by Harry and Ron, the 4 of them passing through the exit in batches. Since Harry hadn't told the Dursleys he was returning to London, only Sherlock and Hermione's parents were there to pick them up. Upon reaching the exit, Sherlock immediately spotted his destination. His mother and Mrs. Granger were anxiously peering into the crowd. The 2 fathers were talking to each other slightly further back. Soon, the 2 sets of parents met their children. These must be Harry and Ron. Mrs. Holmes was very enthusiastic, giving Sherlock a big hug before turning her attention to Harry and Ron. The two were quite flattered. Hermione's parents were the same. Even knowing the two would be staying at the Sherlocks, they still warmly invited them to their home. "Dear Jane, let the children stay with us first. Tannen and I will bring them to visit you in a few days." Hearing Mrs. Holmes say this, Mrs. Granger thought for a moment and agreed. She then pulled Sherlock aside to ask him more questions before parting ways with the Sherlock family. Hermione, before leaving, made a phone call gesture towards Sherlock. Mrs. Holmes and Mrs. Granger smiled knowingly at this. Mr. Granger, however, frowned slightly. "Wait, isn't that a car?" Just then, Ron pointed in surprise at a car behind Mr. Holmes. He noticed the car's sleek and elegant design, with clean and flowing lines on its long side profile. The rear design is simple, with uniquely shaped taillights that echo the overall style of the car, giving it a composed yet fashionable feel. At the front center is a logo featuring a ship's prow and sail, with the word Rover written in gold above the sail, appearing quite light and airy. Upon seeing the elegant dashboard and comfortable seats in the driver's seat, Ron couldn't help but exclaim, "This is way cooler than my old clunker." Mr. Holmes, seeing Ron's surprised expression, couldn't help but be curious. His curiosity only grew after talking to Ron. Ron mentioned that his father, Mr. Weasley, also owned a car. While not as refined or beautiful as his own, that car could fly. A flying car, wasn't that like Knight Rider's kit? No, according to Ron, his father's car could take long-distance flights like an airplane. That was even more impressive than Kit. Because of his love for cars, Ron sat in the passenger seat on the way home. He and Mr. Holmes got along exceptionally well. The two had even agreed that after the Wheeleyes returned from Romania during the summer holidays, Mr. Holmes would also visit Ron's house, mainly to see the Need for Speed car. Sitting in the back seat, Mrs. Holmes watched her excited husband with a knowing smile. She turned to Harry, who sat slightly reserved next to Sherlock, and said, "Harry, don't be so formal. Just treat it like you're at home." "Harry, degree, what? Does that mean I'll have to live in the cupboard?" But he quickly realized that Mrs. Holmes didn't mean that. Mrs. Holmes was a very gentle English woman, and Harry seemed to see a reflection of his own mother in her. They chatted for a few more minutes, and Harry finally relaxed as he had been at their first meeting. This made Mrs. Holmes very happy. No one knows a child better than their mother. She had originally worried that Sherlock would be like he was at Hogwarts, isolated, unsociable, and even bullied. Although in the end, it was always the bullies who suffered. But this wasn't what she wanted to see. This was also why she initially didn't want Sherlock to study in Scotland. She knew the feeling all too well, being far from home, a deep sense of loss, like autumn leaves turning into autumn leaves. She hadn't expected Sherlock to be so happy at Hogwarts. Besides the Granger girl he'd known before school started, he'd even made other friends. This was a delightful surprise. That's why, upon learning that Harry and Ron planned to stay at school, she immediately had Sherlock invite them to her home for the new year. Through observing Harry and Ron along the way, she discovered that the two young wizards trusted, even idolized, Sherlock. For Mrs. Holmes, this was the most gratifying thing. Whether Sherlock would become a great wizard in the future was unimportant. Back on King's Road, Mrs. Holmes went to prepare dinner, while Sherlock led Harry and Ron upstairs. "Both rooms are empty, you can choose yourselves." "You mean, one room each?" Harry and Ron stared wide-eyed in surprise. Everyone had been busy celebrating the New Year these past few days and probably hadn't had time to read. "I will still update 2 chapters daily during the Chinese New Year holiday, at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. each day. Merry Christmas to the characters in the book, and Happy Chinese New Year to all readers." Finally, thank you to reader 20190118202032032068 for the 500 Kidian coins reward. Your support is my motivation to update. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69. No, it's your wand. "Oh, my dear Sherlock, I never imagined you were as damn rich as Hermione," Ron exclaimed dramatically when Sherlock told him and Harry to each choose a room. If they were guests at his house, they'd probably have to squeeze in with him. Ignoring Ron's comment, Sherlock told them, Get some rest after dinner tonight. We're going to Diagon Alley tomorrow morning. Diagon Alley? You want to buy something? Yes, I need your help. No problem, Harry and Ron readily agreed. Harry was overjoyed to hear he could help Sherlock. As for Ron, he figured that with Sherlock's family background, there was no way he'd borrow money from him. As long as it wasn't a loan, anything was negotiable. Mrs. Holmes was an excellent cook, standing out in the generally low-class English culinary scene. Although it didn't look as lavish as the special meals served in the Great Hall at Hogwarts, the taste was in no way inferior. Ron was initially a little reserved. But after tasting the food, they immediately reverted to their usual selves, grabbing chicken legs with both hands and devouring them. Harry, though not as unrestrained as Ron, still ate significantly more than usual. Watching the two enjoy their meal, Mrs. Holmes' eyes crinkled into crescent moons. For Sherlock himself, being able to taste home-cooked food after so long was also a comforting experience. That night, the three young wizards slept soundly. The next day, Sherlock's father drove them to the Leaky Cauldron. The Leaky Cauldron was still dimly lit and sparsely populated. Fortunately, Harry's arrival didn't cause much of a commotion. It seems father has been coming here quite often lately, Sherlock said abruptly to Mr. Holmes as they passed behind the bar and entered the small courtyard surrounded by walls. You're right, Mr. Holmes smiled, unsurprised that his son had noticed. Harry asked curiously, Sherlock, how did you figure that out? That parking space outside was reserved for long-term renters. Just like that, Ron found it unbelievable. Mr. Holmes kept smiling. Clearly, his son's friends had also noticed his unusual behavior. I told you, with careful observation, these things are really nothing special. Besides the parking space, the pub owner clearly treated my father like a regular customer, which means he comes here often lately. Exactly, Mr. Holmes added, although I can't enter Diagon Alley, I can still learn a bit about the wizarding world through this pub. Oh, Uncle Holmes, I bet you'll become good friends with my father, Ron said, his eyes shining. His father worked in the Department for the Prevention of the Misuse of Muggle Items at the Ministry of Magic, and he had a strong interest in everything related to Muggles. Meeting Mr. Holmes, who also shared a strong interest in the wizarding world, the two were bound to have something in common. At this moment, Harry, at Sherlock's instruction, had already tapped the bricks in a fixed position with his wand, opening a passage to Diagon Alley. Sherlock, where are we going? Gringotts. It was the off-season, and Diagon Alley wasn't as crowded as before the start of the school year. On the way to Gringotts Wizarding Bank, Sherlock told his two friends the purpose of their trip, to exchange some Wizarding World currency in Harry and Ron's names. Both being teenagers from wizarding families, their annual limit on galleons they could exchange with pounds was significantly higher than that of Sherlock and Hermione, whose parents were Muggles. Harry and Ron readily agreed. After all, opportunities to help Sherlock were rare. He almost never needed help. The process doesn't need details. With their help, Sherlock finally exchanged enough galleons this time. Harry had seen the little vault his parents had left him in the Gringotts basement before, so he was used to this kind of scene. However, the glittering gold currency completely stunned Ron. He had never seen so much money in his life, and he was completely dazed. It wasn't until he unconsciously followed Sherlock to Ollivander's wand shop that he snapped out of his daze. Sherlock, what are we doing here? Buying wands, of course. Ron looked surprised. Your wand is broken. No, it's your wand, me. Ron pointed to himself, looking incredulous. Just as he was about to say something more, a soft voice interrupted him. Hello, it's rare to see young wizards here at this time of year. Ollivander slowly walked out from inside, his eyes lighting up when he saw Harry. Mr. Potter, we meet again. Hello, Harry greeted Ollivander somewhat awkwardly. At this moment, Sherlock pointed to Ron. My friend needs a new wand. Ollivander's gaze then followed Sherlock to Ron. This must be one of the Weasley boys. Could you show me your wand? Ron didn't take out his wand, but looked at Sherlock with a puzzled expression. Sherlock, what is this? If you haven't forgotten what happened when we first met, you should remember me telling you that you should choose a wand that suits you, otherwise it will affect your spellcasting. Sherlock stared intently at Ron. Since the start of school, you've been having a lot of trouble casting spells, so I'll have to trouble Mr. Ollivander to take a look. If it really is a problem with your wand, then a new wand will be my Christmas present for you. Greek letter Epsilon. Ron's eyes welled up with tears. Because he had 5 excellent older brothers, he had always been the one who was neglected at home. Just as he had said when he first met Harry, his eldest brother Bill was the head of the boys' council, his second brother Charlie was the captain of the Quidditch team, his third brother Percy was a prefect, and his fourth and fifth brothers, the twin brothers, although mischievous, had excellent grades. In this situation, the family naturally hoped that their youngest brother, Ron, could be like them. But then again, even if Ron could, it wouldn't be anything special. His 5 older brothers had already done it before him. As for Ron's performance among the new students, there's really nothing remarkable about him. The only thing worth mentioning is his identity as Harry Potter, the savior of the wizarding world's friend. Of course, Harry himself is fine. Ron can feel that Harry genuinely considers him a friend. Hermione has been the same since the troll incident. However, even Hermione, a close friend, only repeatedly corrects her pronunciation and posture when she fails to cast a spell. This undoubtedly emphasizes that the problem lies with you. No one seems to think that the reason their spell casting isn't going smoothly is because of a second-hand wand. But Sherlock did. Not only did he think of it, but he also put it into practice. Ron's eyes welled up with tears again. Everyone's been busy with the new year these past few days and probably hasn't had time to read. During the New Year period, I'll still guarantee 2 chapters a day, at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Merry Christmas to the characters in the book, and Happy Chinese New Year to all readers. Chapter 70 Dare to Kill My Horse. Sherlock, the sight of the familiar face brought a lump to Ron's throat, and he couldn't help but sniffle. He immediately turned his head away. He couldn't let Sherlock and Harry see him like this. Then he saw Sherlock's father, Mr. Holmes, leaning against the doorway, smiling at him. Ron, this was a little awkward. Young man of the wheel eyes, hurry up and get your wand. Don't keep this old man waiting. When it came to interpersonal skills, Mr. Holmes was clearly much more adept than Sherlock. Noticing Ron's awkward situation, he immediately came to his rescue. Okay. Ron gave Mr. Holmes a grateful look, and as he spoke, he pulled out his worn-out wand. I remember every wand I've sold. Ollivander took the wand, gently stroking the worn-out blade, a deep sense of nostalgia in his eyes. Ash wood, 12 inches, unicorn hair, originally quite elastic, his gaze suddenly sharpened. Speaking of which, when you use it to cast spells, you must feel a considerable amount of stiffness, right? Exactly. You're right, Ron nodded emphatically. Having had no customers for some time, Mr. Ollivander, now that someone was buying a wand, began to speak freely. Just as I expected, it seems that the wizard always chooses the wand, but actually, the wand also chooses its wizard. Unicorn hair is the most loyal wand core, and ash wood is the most loyal wood, a wand made from the combination of the two. Loyal, Ron asked, somewhat puzzled. Loyal. Sincere, Ollivander said confidently. In this case, even if the wand's new owner is a blood relative of the previous owner, it will be difficult to wield. Or rather, if you're not the younger brother of the first wand owner, you might even struggle to cast the most basic spells. Hearing Ollivander's assessment, Ron's eyes widened in surprise. So that was really the reason. It's all thanks to Mr. Holmes' timely discovery, otherwise, it would have affected your progress in learning and casting spells for a long time to come. Ron's eyes welled up with tears again. However, when he looked at Sherlock, he found that the latter had already left. Ron couldn't help but smile. That's right, that's Sherlock's style. There's not much to say about what happened next. After some time, a 14-inch willow wand was chosen for Ron. It's worth mentioning that the wand's core was still made of unicorn hair. According to Ollivander, unicorn hair can cast spells reliably, while willow is suitable for wizards with great potential within them. In short, it's all about loyalty. Ollivander had just handed the packaged wand to Ron when Sherlock returned. Sherlock, what's this? Harry asked curiously, looking at the pile of things Sherlock was carrying. Some materials we'll need later, Harry. That's like saying nothing at all. However, Harry knew perfectly well that Sherlock's answer meant the time wasn't right. When the time was right, Sherlock would naturally tell him the truth. Having known Sherlock for so long, Harry was already used to convincing himself. As for Ron, who had just received his new wand, he couldn't wait to try it out. The result was a silky smooth experience. He even successfully cast the levitation charm, which he had never succeeded with in charms class, on his first try. This thrilled him immensely. Even after returning to Sherlock's house from Diagon Alley, Ron was still eager to try. Unfortunately, according to the British Ministry of Magic, Young wizards were not allowed to cast spells outside of school. There's no such restriction at home. Section 3 of the Law on Reasonable Restraint of Underage Wizards states that intentionally using magic in the presence of muggles in a muggle neighborhood is a crime. Sherlock recited the specific content of the law as if it were a treasure. This is a muggle neighborhood. If I cast a spell, the Ministry of Magic can immediately locate my house. Harry and Ron exchanged bewildered glances. What kind of restraint law was this? They had never heard of it before. However, neither of them doubted the accuracy of Sherlock's words. After all, the other party was Sherlock Holmes. That's a bit boring, Ron sighed. If only I had brought back the wizarding chess set. No, even if I brought my grandfather's set, the Sherlock family doesn't have one. No, I do, Sherlock said, taking out 2 wizarding chess sets. Harry and Ron, Greek letter sigma, degree Cyrillic letter de degree. Sherlock, when did you? Both of them looked shocked. I bought them today in Diagon Alley. Sherlock, you're amazing. Ron jumped up and gave Sherlock a big hug, then started playing with Harry. As for whether playing wizarding chess in the muggle world is illegal? Sorry, I don't know. Anyway, if Sherlock didn't say, then it isn't. In fact, Sherlock knew very well that he was skirting the rules. Because Hogwarts wouldn't sign agreements with them, the young wizards, until summer vacation. But as he had just explained to Ron, this was, after all, a muggle neighborhood. Playing wizard chess is fine. The Ministry of Magic probably already knows Harry Potter is in their house, so they have to give him that much face. But once they use spells, things change. Sure enough, several games went by without incident. This confirmed Sherlock's judgment and pointed the way for future actions. The rules of wizard chess are the same as those of muggle chess, except that all the pieces are alive. Once a piece captures an opponent's piece, it is knocked to the ground and dragged off the board. So playing chess feels more like commanding an army in battle. Although both of them were using a new set of chess pieces, Ron quickly became familiar with them and successfully commanded them. On the other hand, Harry's pieces didn't trust him at all, offering all sorts of advice. Don't send me there. Didn't you see his horse? Send it. It doesn't matter if it dies. Dare to kill my horse. Harry's chess skills were already inferior to Ron's, and being bothered by these pieces made him even more dizzy. After several rounds, the entire process was a constant struggle, with players running around frantically and struggling to keep up. Unsurprisingly, Ron routed them, leaving them utterly defeated. Fortunately, Mr. Holmes intervened, stopping the tide and turning the tide. Initially, when Mr. Holmes, a muggle, took over Harry's black pieces, they ignored his commands or questioned him. But as the game progressed, those unruly pieces became increasingly obedient. By the end of the game, they were almost as attuned to Ron's white pieces, able to control them with complete ease. The game against Ron shifted from a one-sided affair to a close contest. Watching the spirited Ron and his father, Sherlock wasn't surprised at all. This was exactly what he had expected. He turned to Harry. Harry, we're going to number 4 Privet Drive in a couple of days. What? Harry hesitated, glancing at Ron and Mr. Holmes, who were engrossed in wizard chess, and asked softly, just the 2 of us. My mother will drive us there. As for why not his father? Since this is such a rare opportunity, let him enjoy his chess game with Ron. Everyone's been busy with the Lunar New Year these past few days, and most haven't had time to read. Although I'm a new author, I'll still guarantee 2 chapters a day during the Spring Festival. The updates will still be at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. daily. Merry Christmas to the characters in the book, and Happy Chinese New Year to all readers. Finally, thank you to Gishan Zaya Hongchen for the 500 Kidian coins reward and Mumoga for the 100 Kidian coins reward. Your support is my motivation to update. Chapter 71. Madam, you wouldn't want your husband to lose his job, would you? Number 4 Privet Drive, officially 4 Privet Drive in Little Weeking, Surrey. It's a quiet place, seemingly unrelated to magic, and where Harry has lived since childhood. The Sherlock family lives in Kensington and Chelsea, in London. Surrey is in southeast England, bordering Greater London. The distance between them is only about 20 miles, not far. Okay, but what are we going there for? Trusting Sherlock as always, Harry agreed when he suggested going to Privet Drive. He immediately voiced his question. The Dursleys weren't exactly welcoming. There are some things I need to confirm with your aunt, Sherlock said, then changed the subject. Harry, have you decided what gifts to give the professors? No, Harry answered honestly. He genuinely hadn't thought about it at all. So the question is, does this have anything to do with going to Privet Drive? This question was finally answered when they arrived at number 4 Privet Drive with Sherlock. The next morning, Mrs. Holmes drove Sherlock and Harry north out of London. Although Christmas wasn't yet here, the towns they passed through are already filled with a festive atmosphere. Arriving at Privet Drive, it looked much the same as when Harry had left. At Sherlock's prompting, Harry reluctantly and slowly knocked on the door. Soon, a slender blonde woman appeared in his sight. When she saw Harry's face, her long face turned pale instantly. "What brings you here?" Harry had an immediate urge to turn and leave. Fortunately, a hand pressed down on his shoulder. It was Sherlock. He shook his head slightly at Harry, then turned to his mother. "Good morning, Mrs. Dursley." At the same time, Mrs. Holmes stepped forward, giving Aunt Petunia an elegant smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Who are you?" Mrs. Dursley looked at the suddenly appearing adult woman with suspicion. Although on the surface she seemed gentle and intelligent, given her presence alongside Harry, she was probably not a normal person. "I am Verita Holmes. My son Sherlock and Harry are classmates at Hogwarts. I apologize for the intrusion," just as expected. Even though Mrs. Holmes was impeccable in her manners, the moment she heard that her son was attending Hogwarts like Harry, Mrs. Dursley's face immediately showed disgust. She was about to speak when she heard her husband's voice from inside. "What is it, dear?" "The shampoo salesman. They're leaving right away." Turning back to shout, Mrs. Dursley immediately turned to Mrs. Holmes and said in a low voice, "You are not welcome here. You'd better leave before my husband gets angry." Seeing his somewhat exasperated Aunt Petunia, Harry was more than happy to oblige. Mrs. Holmes maintained her elegant smile. "Mrs. Dursley, Harry often mentions you at school, saying you are very caring towards him." "Petunia, you're kidding me." Although she and her husband had indeed raised their nephew for 10 years, it couldn't be described as extremely caring. Of course, in Aunt Petunia's opinion, they had already done more than enough. She was about to send the family and Harry away again when Sherlock suddenly interrupted. "Madam, you don't want your husband to lose his job, do you?" "Petunia, Greek letter sigma, Cyrillic letter dec." Before she could speak, Sherlock continued, "I think Mr. Dursley is probably inviting 2 guests over for dinner tonight, isn't he?" Mrs. Dursley's light-colored eyes narrowed sharply. "If I'm not mistaken, this must be Mr. Dursley's biggest deal in recent years. Isn't it?" Mrs. Dursley's pale face turned deathly white. "It's clear you've made quite a few preparations for this, but once they find out," Sherlock said, pulling his wand from his pocket. He had originally intended to threaten her with words and actions. But unexpectedly, this simple gesture had an incredible effect on Mrs. Dursley. She screamed first, then quickly covered her mouth. At the same time, a bloated, red-faced fat man burst out of the room. Upon seeing this, veins bulged on his temples, and his red face turned a deep purple. Seeing this, Sherlock immediately realized that magic had a far greater impact on this family than he had imagined. So he changed his strategy. "So, aren't you going to invite us in?" Sherlock said, gently stroking his wand. Mrs. Holmes, watching this, shook her head slightly. She had done her best, but her son's method was more effective. 5 minutes later, Mrs. Holmes, Sherlock, and a bewildered Harry sat in the Dursleys' living room. For Harry, this was the first time he had been treated like this by the Dursleys as a guest. It was a very novel feeling. Uncle Vernon, his face dark, said, "Tell me, what do you want?" Sherlock's gaze swept over the Dursleys. Although Harry had told me about his aunt, uncle, and cousin more than once, and I had a fairly clear understanding of them through his descriptions, meeting them in person and observing them firsthand revealed much more. It's fair to say that despite being the Dursleys' nephew, Harry resembled the family in no way. Vernon was a ruddy, overweight man, tall and burly, with almost no neck and an unusually thick beard. Petunia was a thin, blonde woman, the complete opposite of her husband, with a neck almost twice the normal length, a large frame, and a horse-like face. Their son, Dudley, inherited his mother's blonde hair and his father's obese physique, with fair skin and features that seemed almost piled together. As for Harry, his most striking features were his small stature and green eyes. "There's no need for you two to be so tense," Mrs. Holmes maintained her smile, glancing at her son. Sherlock nodded, then turned to Harry's Aunt Petunia. "I just want to know something about Harry's mother." "From what I've observed, Mrs. Dursley should know something about it." "Impossible. Absolutely impossible," Mrs. Dursley shrieked. interrupting Sherlock before he could finish. Harry shrugged helplessly. He had expected this outcome. After all, since learning about the wizarding world from Hagrid, Harry had asked Aunt Petunia about it more than once. Yet, she had refused to say a word. But today, Harry looked at Sherlock with hopeful eyes. Perhaps his friend could do it? After all, he was Sherlock Holmes. Everyone's been busy with a new year these past few days, and most haven't had time to read. Because I'm a newbie, I'll still guarantee 2 chapters a day during the spring festival. The times will remain the same. 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. daily. Merry Christmas to all the characters in the book, and Happy Chinese New Year to all readers. Finally, thank you to Adu for the 5,000 Kidian coins reward. Your support is my motivation to update. Chapter 72. Why are you so skilled? It seems Madame does indeed know quite a bit about magic. Mrs. Dursley's reaction was exactly what Sherlock had expected. Under their tense gazes, he calmly said, "In that case, Madame must have heard of the legilimency spell." Harry looked at Sherlock in shock. Seriously, what are you trying to do? Sherlock's demeanor was impeccably polite, but his words sent a chill down the Dursley's spines. I think you can guess what this spell is used for just from the name. It can forcibly read other people's memories. He once again took out his wand and gently stroked it. Madam, you don't want me to force you with magic, do you, Harry? Cyrillic lettered Sherlock. Harry was stunned. Although he knew Sherlock was deliberately saying this to extract information, his demeanor, his movements, his tone, made him want to shout, "How are you so skilled at this?" Faced with a polite Sherlock, the Dursleys finally gave in. Both men keenly sensed that they couldn't treat Harry's classmate like a child. Mr. Dursley, in particular, was a man of considerable experience. He noticed that Sherlock and his mother's demeanor was no different from the important figures he'd encountered in high society. Petunia, knowing her husband well, could tell what he was thinking just by looking at his expression. All right, since you want to know, she took a deep breath and slowly began to recount the information about Lily Potter, or rather, Lily Evans at the time. Your mother. Lily, her voice was stiff, her lips twitching slightly, as if suppressing some emotion. She was different from others from a young age. Strange things always happened around her, like making withered lilies bloom again. I remember once, she accidentally fell from a tree, but landed lightly on the ground, as if caught by something. Until that summer when she was 11, she received a letter delivered by an owl, just like you. About half an hour later, Petunia finished her narration haltingly. Harry lowered his head, lost in sorrow. Sherlock frowned. Mrs. Dursley's account did provide some additional information. For example, Lily knew a boy from the impoverished Spider's End Alley long before entering Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The boy was always gloomy, wore old clothes, and had greasy hair. The two were close and even went to Hogwarts together, becoming classmates. However, a few years after entering the school, they somehow fell out. Even so, as Harry's mother's older sister, she provided less information than expected. And most of it concerned events before Lily's marriage. According to Petunia, the two sisters lost contact after Lily married Potter. Until 10 years ago, when Mrs. Dursley opened the door one morning to put away the baby bottle, she found the infant Harry in a letter amidst screams. The letter was from Dumbledore, and it was through that letter that she learned of Harry's parents' murder. Despite this, in order to allow her family to continue living a normal life, she hadn't told Harry about magic all these years, and even told him they had died in a car accident. Thank you very much for your account, Mrs. Dursley. Sherlock smiled, but I still think you might want to be a little clearer. What did you say? Mrs. Dursley immediately became alert. I've told you everything I know. Really? Sherlock shook his head, then said something that shocked everyone present. Actually, you envy your sister, don't you? No, I didn't. You're lying. Hearing Sherlock say he envied his sister, Mrs. Dursley immediately panicked and began to explain. Mr. Dursley immediately hugged his wife tightly, looking at her with concern, then turned his gaze to Sherlock. Boy, watch your tone. Unfortunately, Sherlock wasn't Harry, and naturally wasn't intimidated by Mr. Dursley. He looked into Mrs. Dursley's eyes and said calmly, You and Professor Dumbledore have exchanged more than just this one letter, haven't you? You communicated before Harry's mother entered the school. Did you also consider becoming a witch? You? Mrs. Dursley abruptly stood up, looking at Sherlock in a panic. She had lost her composure. Sherlock's words reminded her of her teenage years, that summer with the wind blowing through the air. Although the reply was gentle in tone, It was a ruthless rejection. A letter sent 20 years ago now felt like a sharp knife stabbing into her heart. Finally, the time you decided to sever ties with the wizarding world wasn't when Harry's parents got married. He gave Mrs. Dursley a deep look. I speculate that it was shortly after Harry's mother entered Hogwarts. Harry had shown this expression more often today than the day he first met Hagrid 4 months ago. Aunt Petunia had actually been in contact with Headmaster Dumbledore all along? Aunt Petunia knew Professor Snape all along? Aunt Petunia envied her own mother? It all sounded utterly absurd, yet coming from Sherlock's mouth, it became incredibly convincing. You said you wouldn't use that kind of magic on us, Mr. Dursley roared at Sherlock, clutching his wife tightly. How could you break your promise? Sherlock sighed. Deducing these things doesn't require magic, just like I could tell you we're inviting Mr. and Mrs. Mason to dinner today. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. This time, it was Mr. Dursley's turn to lose his composure. Well, it seems I have to explain. Sherlock seemed somewhat disheartened. He said lazily, Mrs. Dursley was clearly still cooking when she opened the door for us. The dishes and drinks in the kitchen indicate they were for dinner. There wouldn't have been enough time for lunch. There were 2 extra pairs of guest slippers on the shoe rack in the entryway, 1 men's size and 1 women's size, formal and proper, not the style you usually use. All the newspapers on the table had articles about the same company, and its owner was none other than Mr. Mason. Much of the content had been underlined. The tablecloth was clean and tidy, and the plates, cutlery, and glasses were enough for 5 people, clearly prepared for a reception. The golf ball figurine on the living room shelf and the landscape painting of a golf course on the wall were obviously recently hung. Based on this, I can make a double deduction. You are hosting Mr. and Mrs. Mason tonight. Mr. Mason enjoys playing golf, and you hope to steer the conversation to your work during dinner to close this deal. Silence fell. The Dursleys were utterly stunned. Mrs. Holmes looked at her son with pride. Harry puffed out his chest proudly, feeling a surge of honor. Everyone's been busy with the Lunar New Year these past few days, and most haven't had time to read. This newbie author will guarantee 2 chapters a day during the Spring Festival. The times will remain the same. 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. daily. Finally, thank you to Ink Dust for the 500 Kidian coins reward. Your support is my motivation to update. Chapter 73. How did the country become like this? Even after leaving number 4 Privet Drive and settling back into the back of the car, Harry still felt like he was in a dream. He clutched a photo album tightly. This was his biggest takeaway from the trip. Through his conversation with Mrs. Dursley, Sherlock easily deduced that she was a hypocrite, still clinging to traces of her sister's life. He then presented her with his special weight loss pills and anti-hair loss shampoo he had bought in Diagon Alley. Mrs. Dursley wasn't stupid. She had given her nephew a Christmas present in advance, a photograph of Lily in her youth. Interestingly, Mrs. Dursley had initially brushed off her husband, saying Sherlock was there to sell shampoo. Surprisingly, she actually accepted it. Even more intriguing was that the main ingredient in this anti-hair loss shampoo was the Potter family's hair growth remedy. One wonders if this counts as an export to domestic resale. Due to the Dursleys' friendly attitude, Sherlock gave Dudley 2 extra bags of chocolate frogs as a parting gift. Dudley was naturally overjoyed, ignoring his parents' stern gazes as he accepted the present. Sherlock, thank you so much. Before Sherlock could speak, Mrs. Holmes, who was driving, laughed. Without turning her head, she said, "Don't say that, dear Harry, you and Sherlock are friends. Isn't it natural for friends to help each other?" Sherlock nodded, agreeing with his mother, and then pointed to the photo album Harry was looking at. "I suggest sending this photo to Professor Snape. It would be the best Christmas present for him." It was a photo of the 2 of them. The youthful girl had fiery red hair, the ends slightly curled, playfully draped over her shoulders. Her fair skin had a faint blush, her nose was straight and delicate, and her lips were slightly upturned, revealing 2 shallow dimples. Her smile, as bright as sunshine, was warm and healing, capable of dispelling any gloom. As many had said, her deep emerald green eyes were exactly like Harry's, clear and bright. As for the boy whose arm she was holding, aside from his somewhat familiar face, his oily, seaweed-like hair alone was enough to reveal his identity. Harry suddenly understood. No wonder Sherlock had asked him what gift to give the professors. This was what he was waiting for. However, he still hesitated. "My mother really had a good relationship with Snape, Professor Snape, obviously." Sherlock said with certainty. Although we don't yet know the exact reason for their separation, he still feels deep guilt for not protecting your mother. But, is Professor Snape really not related to Voldemort? Harry asked doubtfully. I wanted to tell you last time, when he looked at me at the beginning of the semester, the scar on my forehead started hurting. The previously languid Sherlock immediately became serious upon hearing Harry's words, resting his chin on his hands and looking at Harry with piercing eyes. Your scar started hurting when you looked into Professor Snape's eyes. Yes, Harry honestly described his experience. Although the burning pain disappeared immediately, it really hurt for a moment, something I've never experienced before. Sherlock pondered for a moment, then slowly asked, Are you sure it was from looking into Professor Snape's eyes? And not like at the Quidditch match? Yes. Wait, Sherlock, what do you mean? Hearing Sherlock mention the Quidditch match, Harry immediately recalled the incident. Everyone thought Snape was trying to throw him off his flying broomstick, but Sherlock alone pointed out that Snape was actually protecting him. Perhaps you've forgotten, Sherlock said quietly. The person sitting next to Snape was Quirrell, Harry. Oh, as Christmas approached, the festive atmosphere grew stronger. Ron initially complained about Sherlock and Harry going to Privet Drive without him. But he was quickly drawn to other new things. First, he played wizard chess with Mr. Holmes. Mr. Holmes was quite skilled. The two were evenly matched, a true clash of titans. It was far more interesting than playing chess with Harry. Lately, he had also become obsessed with television. He found it fascinating that a box could play animated scenes and sounds without magic. A few days later, Hermione and her parents arrived at Sherlock's house. It had been almost a week since they returned home from Hogwarts, and Christmas was fast approaching, yet Sherlock hadn't called her once. Finally, Hermione couldn't wait any longer and made a call. Mrs. Holmes immediately seized the opportunity to invite the Granger family over. Mr. Granger was rather displeased. They were supposed to be coming to her house. Mrs. Granger, however, thought it was no big deal. Darling, don't worry about the details, as long as the children are happy. But Hermione wasn't about to let some people off so easily. Sherlock, didn't you say you were going to call? Hermione put her hands on her hips, looking at Sherlock with displeasure. Sherlock, Cyrilla glittered at Harry and Ron, seeing this, couldn't help but chuckle. It was a rare treat to see Sherlock get flustered. And you too. Harry, why didn't you remind Sherlock to call? Ron, if you can't call, you can always send a letter by L. Right, Harry and Ron, seeing Hermione's expression, Mrs. Holmes and Mrs. Granger couldn't help but chuckle as well. Youth is wonderful. Yes, it is. As for Mr. Granger, he and Mr. Holmes were watching the news on TV, discussing it quietly. These are truly turbulent times. Mr. Holmes looked at the bald man giving a passionate speech on the news and shook his head slightly. Damn it, how did the country become like this? The usually mild-mannered Mr. Granger rarely cursed like this. If this continues, this country will become a laughingstock in the international community. Mr. Holmes glanced at him with some surprise, not expecting Hermione's father to have this side to him. I suggest you go to the bank and borrow some rubles to exchange for pounds, Mr. Holmes said cautiously to Mr. Granger after watching the news for a while. Don't make the amount too large. Mr. Granger was taken aback. You also think? It's hard to say, just a possibility. Mr. Granger pondered for a moment, then consulted his wife. In the end, the two decided to follow Mr. Holmes's advice and go to the bank tomorrow. The Granger family and the Holmes family were already quite familiar with each other. He trusted Sherlock's father's judgment. Sherlock naturally saw what the two families were doing. However, politics was too far removed from his 11 years old, and not something he should be concerned with at the moment. But after learning that magic still existed in this world, Sherlock couldn't help but have some doubts. If this giant really fell, would it affect the magical world? Chapter 74 is now available for purchase. February 1st, Saturday, the fourth day of the Lunar New Year. As a newbie author, this is an incredibly exciting moment. As I mentioned in the chapter notes of the previous chapters, everyone is busy celebrating the new year, and there aren't many readers. I originally thought of taking advantage of this opportunity to secretly release it without anyone noticing, but then I realized that would be self-deception, so I decided against it. Speaking my mind, I'll say a lot. Getting back to the point. When I finished my previous book, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, I actually had two directions for my new book. One was to continue the historical theme and write Adau's transmigration to Emperor Gaozong of Song. The other was this book you're reading now, Sherlock Holmes and Hogwarts. I was initially more inclined to write the former, since it's also historical, and the protagonist is a Dao, which in a sense continues the Three Kingdoms theme, and there's a high overlap in readers. However, things didn't go as planned. In the first half of last year, my company arranged for me to go abroad, and I couldn't write for a long time. My plans were completely disrupted. After much deliberation, I decided to abandon history altogether and rewrite fantasy. Although this is a significant leap, it provides a good opportunity for research. After returning from my research trip and dealing with accumulated work, it took me quite a while to begin preparing the new book. As a part-time author, consistently writing 5,000 or 6,000 words a day is no easy feat. Therefore, thorough preparation was essential. As a result, the book wasn't released until the end of last year. I wonder how many readers still have on my old book. As a newbie, I know very well that pre-release and post-release performances are two different things. So, since you're here during the new year, and you're still a kid, it's not easy for anyone. Please subscribe. I also know some readers just like to read for free, using tactics like next time, for sure with masterful skill. It's not that they don't have money, they just enjoy that. Logically, I should be playing the victim now. But I just can't pull that off. After all, as I've already said with my previous books, as a part-time writer, I have a stable job. I got married before I turned 30, and my marital life is harmonious. My parents are healthy, and my younger sister got into a local university and can come home every week. Now, times have changed. I have another daughter, and my sister graduated from university, found a local job, and can still come home every week. Although there are still various worries in work and life, overall, my life is passable, not terrible. Unfortunately, this book didn't get a strong recommendation from Sanjiang Publishing House. Ultimately, it's just too weak. However, I will still try my best to tell a good story and strive for greater improvement, just like before. Those who have read my previous works know that my greatest strength is my unwavering character. Once I start a book, no matter how bad the results are, I will finish the story. A book with 10 subscribers reached 500,000 words, 20 subscribers reached 1 million words, 50 subscribers reached 2 million words, and 250 subscribers reached 2.4 million words. This highlights my perseverance. So, don't worry about me cutting off my own writing. This book was definitely more difficult to conceive than my previous ones. And I lost a lot of hair. Bonus chapter rules after release. Go. Actually, it's the same as the last book. 1. 1 extra chapter for every 500 more monthly subscriptions. 2. 1 extra chapter for every 1,000 more monthly votes. 3. 1 extra chapter for each alliance leader, although I probably won't get one, but you have to have dreams, otherwise what's the difference between you and a salted fish? Besides the extra chapters, the daily update will be 2,000 words more than before release, 3,000 words per chapter, still at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Then, thanks to the following friends for recommending the chapters, and I'll also shamelessly offer a sacrifice. Turbulent 1979, by Nebai Fo. One of the female leads is the Queen of the Women's Kingdom, a harem novel, the latest masterpiece from a veteran urban entertainment author, plentiful and satisfying, top-notch quality. What's wrong with one more rich person, Yuzu, a talented urban fiction author like Lao Fo, with stable updates, a large volume of content, and reliable quality. A very interesting 2008 historical fiction. Warring States Survival Guide. Undersea Walker, a guy who claims to have only 500 fans, shameless, with a unique writing style. Don't miss it if you like this genre. Mythical Three Kingdoms. Grave Soil and Wild Grass. I suggest you be cautious with this one, as it's already updated to 4,700 chapters. Be careful, the author might abandon it, but the content is still highly recommended. Reborn in 2010, unparalleled hero not old dog, an experienced author who switched from fantasy to urban fiction. Judging from the title, it's another historical fiction, with stable updates and a large volume of content. Burning the World from Liangzhu. Little Black Hat. Although titled Liangzhu, the protagonist is Su Zhuan. A well-integrated mix of folklore, mythology, and supernatural tales. Others. Tame Beasts. You Tame Beast Girls. Young Abing, a passionate young man's fantasy work, an original world-building beast-taming novel. Those who like this genre should check it out. The Martial Arts of the Mind begins with Hypnosis, a novel that will get you hooked. It features a high-level martial arts fantasy world with a fresh setting, good writing, and a powerful and imposing protagonist. What to Do When You're Transmigrated into a Surf in a Fantasy World, by Parker in a Magic Bottle, a veteran author's new pseudonym. He doesn't let me mention the original author. The word count is a bit low, but it's worth a read. The Book of Chaos, by Jicha. The book is finished, but it's definitely good. He also provided the beginning and ideas for my previous Three Kingdoms novel, but unfortunately, I didn't write it well. The Dragon's Demise, by Garlic Fears Water. The only downside is the slightly unstable updates. Also, readers recommended by Erden. Please stop criticizing me, my writing skills are nowhere near those of the masters. Let them offer their loyalty, by Chang Shi, a veteran light novel author. This book is packed with elements of transmigration, apocalypse, evil energy, and superpowers. It's rich yet coherent, and updates are stable. Avoiding misfortune and seeking good fortune begins at the Celestial Master's Mansion, by August Flying Eagle, a veteran fantasy author known for subverting tropes. His writing style is humorous, and the characters are well developed. This book is also quite lengthy and satisfying. Finally, I wish everyone a happy new year and all the best. Chapter 75, December 25, 1991. Hermione was furious. She was already annoyed that Sherlock hadn't contacted her during the holidays. Now, hearing that Sherlock had taken Harry to Privet Drive, she was even more indignant. Why hadn't he invited her along for such an interesting trip? Unfortunately, it was too late. Finally, at Ron's strong suggestion, Sherlock played several of their favorite violin pieces as compensation. This time, Ron finally got his chance. Sherlock played the violin very well, even capable of some difficult pieces. But, he just wouldn't play properly. During his stay at Sherlock's house, Ron had endured Sherlock's jarring solos more than once. Every evening, Sherlock would lean back in his armchair, place his violin flat on his lap, close his eyes, and casually strum. The sound was sometimes high-pitched and melancholic, sometimes strangely cheerful, sometimes unpleasant and grating, like sawing wood. Ron found it incredibly unbearable. But Mr. and Mrs. Holmes seemed to have long since grown accustomed to it. Harry remained silent. In this situation, Ron could only run to his bedroom and lock the door. Unfortunately, Sherlock's piano playing was extremely penetrating. He could hear it even through the door, causing him considerable distress. Now, with Hermione's arrival as a powerful ally, he seized the opportunity to make his demands. Ultimately, he achieved a result that satisfied everyone. Hermione's anger subsided. Ron also breathed a long sigh of relief. He even thought that if this situation continued for a few more days, he might have lost his temper. The Granger family left after dinner. Hermione was still somewhat reluctant to see them go. But before leaving, she could only remind Sherlock again to call or send a letter by owl. A few days later, it finally arrived at December 25, 1991. Christmas Day. On this day, Mr. Granger's spiteful words from a few days earlier came true. The Unbreakable Alliance became a self-destructive alliance, truly becoming a laughingstock in the international community. It is no exaggeration to say that the collapse of the alliance was the most profound international event to have a far-reaching impact on the Muggle world since World War II. Whether this event will affect the wizarding world remains to be seen. However, for the young wizards at Hogwarts, it obviously won't have much of an impact. Many are completely unaware of it, and even those who are more concerned with what Christmas presents they've received. When Sherlock, Harry, and Ron woke up that morning, their rooms were already filled with gifts. This was a perk of the wizarding world. Owls could deliver Christmas presents in place of the old man in the red hat and white beard. Sherlock stared silently at the pile of packages. He was somewhat surprised. So many people were giving him gifts? Surprise, Merry Christmas. Just as he was pondering this, Harry and Ron suddenly pushed open Sherlock's door. Clearly, they intended to surprise him. However, when they saw the room overflowing with packages, they both gasped in surprise. Hiss, Sherlock, you received so many gifts? Actually, Harry had already been surprised when he woke up that morning and saw the small pile of packages at the foot of his bed. Just then, Ron knocked on his door, excitedly showing him his gifts. Come quick, look. I got some presents. What did you expect? Cabbages, Ron chuckled after saying that. His pile of packages was much larger than Harry's. This was understandable, he had far more relatives and friends than Harry. The two decided to go find Sherlock first. Then they witnessed this astonishing scene. After a while, Ron came to his senses, pointing to a bulging paper package and saying, "This must be from my mother." "Ron, have you finally learned to deduce things through observation like Sherlock? I saw the same gifts in your room just now," Ron muttered. "She must have knitted one of those Weasley sweaters for each of you." I think Hermione must have received one too." At Harry and Ron's insistence, the three of them gathered their gifts together and opened them. Just as Ron had predicted, Mrs. Weasley gave Sherlock a blue hand-knitted sweater with a large red S embroidered on the chest. Harry's sweater was green with an H embroidered on the chest, and Ron's was magenta with an R embroidered on the chest. A large box of homemade fudge was also included with the sweaters. They tasted quite good. Next was Hagrid. He gave each of them a handmade flute, somewhat rough in workmanship, but exceptionally sturdy. Hermione's gifts were more interesting. She gave Harry a box of horseshoe-shaped chocolates and Ron a large box of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. Sherlock received a book. To Harry and Ron's surprise, the book wasn't the case studies of magical crimes they had previously agreed upon, but rather, The Charismatic Speaker. A note was attached to the cover, with a line written in elegant handwriting, "Study hard, Sherlock." Harry, Ron, Sherlock flipped to the title page and found the following sentence: "This book provides an exclusive formula for language communication skills, making you a master of speech who, when he speaks, is astounding." Sherlock, seeing Sherlock's silence, Ron finally couldn't help but ask, "Sherlock, what did you give Hermione? It's not another book, is it?" Harry guessed. "It is a book." Harry and Ron perked up their ears. "The title is Makeup for Beginners," Harry and Ron gasped. "Good grief. Are you two trying to hurt each other?" "I don't understand," Harry expressed his incomprehension. "Why would you give Hermione a book like that?" Clearly, the gifts Sherlock gave him and Ron were very practical. The wand was undoubtedly a godsend for Ron, and the wizard chess set was also acceptable. How come the style changed so drastically when it came to Hermione? When giving gifts, you should consider practical needs. Harry, degree. Sherlock, may I ask, do you think Hermione needs to learn makeup and dressing up? Obviously, Harry and Ron exchanged glances. So that's how it is. No wonder Hermione gave you this book in return, even withdrawing the case studies of magical crimes that she had prepared long ago. What gifts did you give to the others? Since the topic had come up, Harry became interested and asked again. Professor Dumbledore received 3 consecutive years of periodontal checkups and free teeth cleaning. Professor McGonagall received a set of English-style tea sets. Professor Snape received a small freezer that could store medicine for a long time. Professor Flitwick received a music box that could be both rechargeable and battery-operated. I gave Professor Sprout and Hagrid books, the Illustrated Guide to Home Gardening and the Complete Book of Rare Wild Animals. Hearing Sherlock's unhesitating answer, Harry and Ron couldn't help but look at each other in bewilderment. So the question is, the gifts given to the professor and the two of them were all normal, so why did things change so drastically when it came to Hermione? Why? Oh well, it's no use saying more now. Anyway, their gifts have already been given. As for Sherlock and Hermione, whatever. During the subsequent unwrapping of the gifts, the two of them finally understood why Sherlock had received so many presents. Dear Sherlock Holmes, thank you from the bottom of my heart for covering for me time and time again in Charms class. Your loyal Seamus Finnegan. To Sherlock Holmes, thank you for recommending such an excellent seeker to the team, and of course, it would be even better if you could join us. Oliver Wood, always ready to welcome you. Sherlock, thank you for always finding Rayford for me. Neville Longbottom. Holmes, thanks to you, my father was cleared of suspicion. Merry Christmas, from the Hannah Abbott family. Mr. Holmes, thank you for solving my problem. Cho Chang. Only then did Harry and Ron realize how many good deeds Sherlock had done behind their backs. It sounded a little strange, but it was indeed true. Sherlock, have you ever considered becoming a detective? Dear Harry, my childhood dream was to be a pirate. Harry suddenly didn't know what to say. Wait, tell me first, what is a detective? And so, the morning slowly passed in this uneventful conversation among the three. After lunch, Mr. and Mrs. Holmes went for a walk, leaving the three friends indoors. Harry and Ron resumed their wizarding chess game. For Ron, playing high-level games every day, a little bit of bronze-level play was a welcome change. Sherlock, on the other hand, stared blankly at the wall. If no one reminded him, he might well have continued like that all afternoon. Until Hermione called. She told Sherlock in a curt tone that Mr. Granger had taken Mr. Holmes's advice and borrowed some rubles from the bank. Judging from the current situation, he had definitely won the deal. It was just a matter of whether it was a small win, a medium win, or a big win. When she found Sherlock's response perfunctory and his lack of explanation about the Christmas presents, she angrily hung up. A short while later, the phone rang again, and Hermione talked incessantly about the other gifts she had received. They weren't exactly satisfactory, but at least they were passable. However, Sherlock remained unmoved. Hermione angrily hung up again. After that, Sherlock suggested going for a walk outside, refusing to let Harry and Ron come with him. As soon as Sherlock left, Ron spoke first. Actually, sometimes I also find Hermione annoying. Sherlock must have left because he didn't want to answer Hermione's calls anymore, obviously. Hey, buddy, don't mimic Sherlock, am I? Obviously, you have the nerve to say that. As the two were arguing, the phone rang again. Harry and Ron exchanged glances and then made the same choice, to ignore it. However, to their dismay, Hermione seemed determined and refused to give up, insisting on calling back. She's really persistent. Ron shook his head and nudged Harry with his elbow. Go ahead, old Harry, you know I can't handle this. Harry sighed deeply, picked up the receiver, and the persistent ringing stopped abruptly. Hermione, Sherlock has already left. To Harry's surprise, there was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone, followed by a strange man's voice. Are you Harry Potter? Or Ronald Weasley? Harry was startled. Who are you? The strange man chuckled. Me? I'm the person Sherlock Holmes could possibly befriend. What did you say? What do you mean? Harry was shocked and quickly gestured to Ron. Ron looked at Harry, puzzled. Harry panicked, gesturing and lip-reading until Ron finally understood. Without a word, Ron immediately went out to find Sherlock. The strange man on the other end seemed oblivious, continuing in a calm voice, an enemy, at least that's how he sees it. If you ask him personally, he might say I'm his nemesis, haha, he just loves making a big deal out of things. Am I right, Mr. Harry Potter? How did you? Harry's astonishment grew. This mysterious man knew about him and Ron the moment he received the call, and now he had narrowed it down to him personally. Didn't you just let Mr. Weasley leave? The voice chuckled. It seems Holmes didn't tell you that making other movements while speaking affects the vocal cords, did he? Also, your friend's movements were rather loud. I could hear the door opening and closing from several feet away. Who are you? I've already said I'm Sherlock Holmes's nemesis, so, you intend to continue being friends with him? That's none of your business. That's hard to say. The voice laughed again, its laughter filled with pleasure. I'm calling to tell you that I'm willing to pay you a considerable fee regularly, as long as you do me a favor. What favor? Harry, already wary, became even more alert. A message. No need to pry into my privacy, and I won't put you in a difficult position. Just tell me what he's doing. Why? Who are you? What's your purpose in doing this? This was the third time Harry had questioned the other party's identity. However, the other person still avoided answering the question. Because he always worries me. I care about his life, but for various reasons. I hope you'll keep this to yourself. I won't agree. Calm down, Mr. Potter. I haven't even mentioned the specifics of the payment. That's irrelevant. I'm just not interested, and besides, Sherlock is my friend. I won't do this for you, Harry said firmly. Don't you trust anyone but Sherlock Holmes? For some reason, even though Harry had refused, the other person's voice didn't sound angry. Instead, it became even lighter. Or, should I talk to Mr. Ronald Weasley? As far as I know, he's not exactly flush with cash. He should be happy to help me. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.